Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Midnight Stories. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be nice if everyone could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Alright, let's get comfy, relax, and begin. I spent that weekend alone at a cabin I'd rented deep in the woods of northern Michigan. It was an old place, not modern or fancy, but that's what I wanted, something quiet, far from the road, where I could shut off my phone and not see another person for a couple of days. It was mid-October, just cold enough that the leaves had all changed and most had fallen, but not cold enough yet for snow. The wind that came through the trees at night had a sharpness to it though, and I had to keep the fireplace going to stay warm. I arrived Friday afternoon. The cabin was tucked maybe half a mile down a dirt path off a narrow road that barely had a shoulder. No one else was around. No other houses, no other cabins, just forest. The nearest neighbor, from what I'd been told, was about 2 miles away. I liked that. The idea of not hearing cars or voices or anything but wind and birds. I parked the car just off the dirt path, carried my bags inside, and locked the front door behind me. There was a small kitchen, a sitting area with a couch and fireplace, a bathroom, and one bedroom. All wooden floors, a bit creaky, but it felt solid. I'd brought food, water, firewood, everything I needed. That first night went normal. I built a fire, heated up some soup, sat on the couch, and read a book. I wasn't scared or anxious. There wasn't anything to be scared about. I double-checked the doors and windows before bed, even tested the deadbolts. Not because I was nervous, just because I always do that when I'm in a new place. Everything was locked. The cabin had a front door with a knob lock and a deadbolt, and a back door with the same. There were 4 windows, all with latches. I checked each one, even tugged on them a little to be sure. Then I went to bed around midnight. The bedroom was simple, wood floors, old rug, queen bed with a heavy blanket. The wind picked up that night, and I remember hearing it slide through the trees and whistle a little at the edges of the windows. Normal forest sounds. Occasionally, I heard cracking branches out in the woods, but nothing strange. Just forest things. When I woke up, it was just getting light. The sky outside the bedroom window was pale gray. I didn't feel scared right away or anything like that. I felt rested, but when I stepped out into the main room, something felt different. I noticed the cold first. The fire had gone out during the night, but it was colder than it should have been, like a door had been left open. I looked at the front door. It was shut, but the deadbolt was turned back, and the knob lock was open. That stopped me. I stood there staring at it for a second. I knew I'd locked it. I remembered the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place. I walked over and locked it again, just out of instinct, then turned and checked the windows. Every one of them had the latch open. Every single one. I started moving a little faster, checking everything. The back door, too, unlocked, deadbolt undone. But nothing was missing. My bags were untouched. The food I'd brought was all there. My wallet was still in my backpack. No signs of forced entry. No muddy prints on the floor. No broken windows. Nothing. Just everything unlocked. For the next hour, I walked through the cabin over and over, checking for anything else out of place. I moved furniture, looked under the bed, behind the couch, inside cabinets, even up at the rafters. Nothing. Just the locks. That was the only thing wrong. I stood outside on the porch for a while after that, just trying to calm down. The air was cold, and the woods were still. Nothing moved. No animals, no wind, just silence. That silence made things worse. I didn't want to panic, but I kept going over everything in my head. I knew I had locked every single thing before I went to bed. There's no way I forgot. I even remembered testing the windows to make sure they were shut tight. And even if I had missed one, I wouldn't have missed all of them. I told myself maybe I'd sleepwalked. Maybe I got up during the night and unlocked everything. But I've never sleepwalked in my life. I've never even talked to my sleep. And even if I had sleepwalked, what are the chances I unlocked every single thing, including the deadbolts, and then went back to bed without waking up? That idea didn't sit right. None of it did. I kept trying to think logically, but the feeling in my gut was getting heavier. Not like panic, but something else, like something was off and I couldn't explain it. I stayed the rest of that day, mostly because I wanted to see if anything else would happen. I told myself maybe there was some weird draft in the cabin, or the locks were loose. I tested them all again. The doors needed real pressure to turn the deadbolts, and the windows latched firmly. Nothing was loose. That night, I did the same routine. Locked the front and back doors, double-checked the windows, turn off the lights. I even slid a chair in front of the front door just to see if it would move. I laid in bed, but I didn't sleep much. I kept listening. Every little creak in the wood sounded louder. Every gust of wind felt like it was carrying something with it. At one point, I thought I heard something shift on the porch, but when I looked through the window, nothing was there. Eventually, I fell asleep. When I woke up, the same thing had happened. Every lock was undone. Both deadbolts turned back. Both doorknobs unlocked. All the windows unlatched. The chair I'd put in front of the door hadn't moved an inch. But again, nothing else was touched. My things were all where I left them. No prints, no scuffs, no signs of someone inside. I didn't stay a third night. I packed up right then, still early morning, barely any light in the sky. I locked everything before I left, not because it mattered, but out of habit. The drive out was quiet. I didn't see a single other car on the way back down the dirt path or the main road. I didn't stop for gas until I was back into town with traffic lights. That was 2 weeks ago. I've been trying to make sense of it since. I looked up the cabin online. No bad reviews, no weird stories. Just other people saying it was peaceful, remote, quiet. I didn't write a review. I didn't want to explain it. The most logical answer I could think of is that someone came into the cabin during the night. Not to steal, but just to be inside. Someone with a key. Maybe the owner. Maybe someone who used to own it. Maybe someone who just found it and knows how to get in. Maybe they didn't take anything because they weren't there for that. Maybe they just wanted to stand inside for a while. Maybe watch. That thought hasn't left me since. I haven't slept well lately. Every night before bed, I check all my own locks now. Front door, back door, windows. I even bought a door brace for the inside. I keep my phone charged and close. But even when everything's locked, I keep waking up with this thought in my head. What if the locks aren't to keep someone out? What if they're just there so they know when you stopped watching? It was the last week of October, right before the real cold settled in. A few friends and I decided to get one last camping trip in before winter. We picked a trail system up north in the forest preserves. It wasn't a touristy area, and that's exactly why we chose it. No crowds, no cars, no distractions, just trees, dirt, and quiet. We weren't professionals or anything, just four guys who liked hiking, cooking over a fire, and getting drunk under the stars once in a while. We parked at the lot near the trailhead, loaded our packs, and headed in around noon. The plan was simple. Hike to Site C3, a marked camping area about 7 miles in, spend the night, then hike back out the next day. We had a printed map and used trail markers to stay on track. They were these small, colored rectangles painted on trees. Why was the main trail? Red marked the C loop, which led to our campsite. There were also blue and yellow markers, which we were told not to follow unless we were connecting to a different loop entirely. The hiking was fine. A little muddy in spots, but otherwise peaceful. Trees still had some color left, but most of the leaves had already dropped. We made it to C3 after about 4 hours. It was a little clearing with a rusty fire ring, a few logs set up like benches, and a flat area just big enough for our tents. There was a stream nearby. We filtered water and got a fire going before sunset. That night was colder than we expected. The wind picked up and we all zipped up tight in our sleeping bags. I kept waking up because of the cold and the sound of branches creaking. Sometime in the middle of the night, I heard something that sounded like a tree falling far off. It echoed through the woods. I laid there staring at the roof of my tent for what felt like forever. Next morning, we had breakfast, packed up, and decided to try a different way back. According to the map, we could loop through a shorter section of the red trail that would reconnect to the main white trail without backtracking. It didn't look much longer, maybe a mile more, but we thought it would be more interesting. About half a mile in, we came across a tree with a red marker on it, and below it, a faint yellow one. That didn't make sense, since the yellow was supposed to be part of a completely different section of the forest. Still, we were sure we were going the right way. Another quarter mile in, we stopped seeing red markers entirely. We should have turned around right then, but we didn't. Instead, We kept walking, thinking we'd hit a junction soon. The trees got denser. The trail, which had been wide and clear, narrowed until we were stepping over roots and ducking under branches. The ground was uneven and covered in thick layers of leaves. The wind had died, and everything was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no rustling, just the sound of our boots and our breathing. We spotted another yellow marker, then a blue one. Now we knew we'd screwed up. These weren't just faded red marks or mis-painted signs. We'd followed the wrong trail. At first, we figured we'd just keep going and find a way back to the main trail. But then the markers stopped altogether. No colors, no blazes, just trees. We pulled out the map again, but it didn't help. We'd gone too far off. The map didn't show the smaller, unofficial trails that sometimes spidered off the main paths. And the worst part was that we hadn't been tracking how many turns we'd made or where we'd started seeing the different colors. We still had about 4 hours of daylight left, so we decided to keep walking in the same general direction we thought the road was in. We were wrong. We walked for what had to be another hour and a half. The terrain started to slope down into a valley. Everything started looking the same. Bare trees, old logs, brush. Every so often, we'd think we saw a path, but it would just fade into the woods. Eventually, we hit a low area with swampy ground. The smell of rot hung in the air, and the mud sucked at our boots. One of the guys slipped and went down hard, soaking his pack. By now, tension was building. No one said it, but we were getting scared. I could feel it in the way we moved, faster, sloppier, scanning the woods like we were expecting something to jump out. I wasn't worried about animals. I was worried about getting stuck out there overnight, off trail, with no real idea where we were. We stopped to rest near a moss-covered boulder. One of us climbed it to try and get a better view, but all he saw were more trees. That's when we heard it, a mechanical hum, faint but steady. It was far off, but we all perked up. It sounded like a generator or maybe a chainsaw. Maybe there was a ranger's outpost or some private land nearby. We followed the sound. It got louder. About 40 minutes later, we came out onto a clearing. It wasn't a ranger station. It was an old shack, small, wooden, falling apart. Pieces of metal junk were scattered all around it. Broken buckets, rusted tools, even the frame of a car that looked like it hadn't moved in decades. There were wires strung between trees, weird lengths of fencing, and empty cans stacked in rows. And there was a generator running behind the shack. No one said anything. We stood at the edge of the clearing, staring at it. There were no signs of anyone, but the generator was on. We didn't know if we should approach or leave. Part of me wanted to walk up, knock on the door, ask for help. But another part of me, the bigger part, felt something was wrong. The way everything was arranged felt off. Like whoever lived there didn't expect visitors. Like they wanted to keep people out. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Hanging from a nail on the side of the shack was a backpack. It looked newer than everything else. Bright blue. Too new. We slowly backed away. We didn't say it, but we all knew what it meant. Someone else had ended up here before us. We hiked in silence for hours after that. Didn't even try to follow trails anymore. Just aimed for higher ground and tried to keep moving west. I started to feel dizzy from not drinking enough water. My mouth was dry, my legs burned, and the light was fading. Just before dark, we saw a metal gate through the trees. We rushed toward it and came out onto a dirt service road. About an hour after that, a pickup truck came by. A guy working for the Forestry Service picked us up, and when we asked him what trail we'd been on, he looked confused. He said that area wasn't marked for hikers, hadn't been maintained in over 20 years. We didn't tell him about the shack. Later that night, back at home, I tried to trace the route we must have taken on a digital map. I couldn't find the path we followed, and I definitely couldn't find a shack. I don't know if it was someone's old hunting cabin or something else. I just know we never should have followed the wrong markers. I haven't gone camping since. I still have the map, tucked into a drawer, the red trail traced in pen. Every time I see it, I remember the sound of that generator humming in the middle of nowhere. We drove deep into the woods that Friday afternoon, past the small towns, past the cell phone range, until the trees grew thick and the road turned to gravel. It was me, Adam, and Safe. We planned this trip for weeks, just the three of us, a long weekend off the grid, far from the city noise. We were all tired of screens and work and people. We found a spot marked on an old hiking forum, not an official campsite, just a clearing a little off a trail called Miller's Path. No signs, no park rangers, nothing commercial. Exactly what we wanted. Wild and quiet. The spot was perfect. Flat ground, tall pines, and a small stream nearby. We parked the car a short walk away and carried our gear in. We set up a big 3-person tent, laid out our sleeping bags, built a ring of stones for the fire. The sun was just dipping when we got the fire going. It was cool out, and the wind through the trees sounded like soft rushing water. I remember feeling good. No reception, no schedules, just the woods and the crackling of fire. That night we cooked simple, canned stuff, some sausage and bread. We talked a bit, mostly about dumb things. We didn't need deep conversations. That was the whole point of camping, just being there. Around 10, we tossed the scraps in a bag and hung it from a tree, high enough that animals couldn't reach it. We crawled into the tent, zipped up, and lay there in the dark with only the forest sounds around us. I was the last to fall asleep. I remember listening to the wind and the small clicks of branches snapping far away. Just a forest settling, I thought. It's always noisy if you pay attention. I drifted off eventually. I woke up around 2:30 a.m. I didn't check the time, but I had a sense. It was the kind of wake-up where you're not sure why you're awake at first. No full bladder, no dreams. Just awake. The tent was dark. Our small battery lantern was off, and I could hear Adam breathing softly on one side, Safe on the other. Then I heard it. Laughter. It came from somewhere past the tent, not close, not far. Maybe 30, 40 feet away. I froze. My brain didn't know what to make of it at first. It wasn't loud. It was low, quiet, a soft laugh like someone was trying not to wake someone else. It didn't echo. It was quick, maybe 3 or 4 chuckles, then silence. I lay there listening. My heart started to beat harder. I didn't move. I didn't know if I should wake the others. Maybe it was an animal. Some animals make weird noises. But laughter? This was definitely human. Another laugh, this time from the other direction. A different pitch. Not loud either, but clear and definitely closer. I didn't imagine it. I know I didn't. My body tensed, my ears straining. My eyes stared at the tent wall, but it was just black. We hadn't turned on a lantern, and no moonlight was cutting through the fabric. I listened for footsteps. Nothing. Just a breeze moving through the trees. Then another laugh. Further off this time. Higher. A little drawn out. I couldn't tell if it was male or female. It didn't matter. I didn't move. I didn't want to make a sound. I didn't even breathe deeply. 10 minutes must have passed. I lay still, sweating lightly despite the cold. There were no more laughs. Just wind and the creak of the trees. I thought about waking the others, but I didn't want to speak. I didn't want to be the only one making noise. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep again because the next thing I knew, light was coming through the tent walls. Safe was already unzipping the flap. Adam was stretching. I didn't say anything at first. I listened. Nothing unusual. Just birds. Wind. A squirrel darting through dry leaves. I got out and looked around. Nothing strange. Just our gear, the dying fire pit, the trees. I wandered off a bit, just to make sure. I didn't see anything. No trash. No broken branches. No signs of anyone else. But I couldn't shake it. When we were making breakfast, just oatmeal and instant coffee. I asked, trying to keep my voice casual, if either of them had heard anything weird during the night. They both said no. Adam joked about me dreaming. I let it go. We spent the day hiking. Took a rough trail past a ridge, looked over a wide valley. It was beautiful. For a while, I forgot about the night. We got back to camp in the afternoon and gathered some more firewood. The place was still quiet. No other tents, no voices, no signs of people. That night, we sat around the fire again. Talked a little more, joked, shared some snacks. But I was more alert now, watching the tree line, listening for anything out of place. After a while, we turned in. Same routine. Pack the food, hang the bag, zip the tent. I lay down, this time with the lantern close. I didn't sleep well. I kept drifting in and out. Every time the wind shifted or a branch snapped, I opened my eyes. Around 3 a.m., I heard again. Laughter. This time it was closer. Same soft chuckling. It didn't sound joyful. It didn't sound like friends joking or someone watching something funny. It sounded strange. It stopped and started. A few seconds of silence. Then a laugh from another direction. They were moving. Circling. There was more than one. I reached for the lantern and clicked it on. Just a soft glow, enough to see. I looked at the others. They were still asleep. I didn't speak. I didn't want to make noise. I lay back down, heart hammering, and kept the light on. The laughter faded again after a while. 15 minutes? 20? It felt longer. I stayed awake until the sky started to lighten. I got out of the tent as soon as I could and looked around again. I walked past the trees, maybe 20 yards out. That's when I saw it. A cigarette butt, still fresh, not weathered, slightly pressed into the dirt. Then I found another closer to a tree, a different brand. I picked it up. Still smelled like it had been smoked recently. I kept walking, and that's when I saw the footprints. They were light in the dry dirt, but clear if you looked. A few near the base of a tree. Another set off to the left. They weren't ours. I was sure of it. The treads didn't match any of our shoes. I followed them for a few feet, and they just disappeared into the leaves and pine needles. I went back to camp and quietly told Adam and Safe what I saw. Their mood changed fast. They got serious. We didn't eat. We packed everything in near silence. Fire out, tent down, gear loaded. We didn't talk about it on the way back. No jokes, no music in the car. We stopped at a gas station after almost 2 hours of driving. There was a small bulletin board outside. Flyers, missing pets, a hand-scrawled notice for firewood. One paper caught my eye. A printed out page with 2 photos and some text. The photos were of 2 young men, smiling. One had a backpack. The other had sunglasses on his head. It said they went missing in the same forest last year. Last seen near Miller's Path. We got back to the city before evening. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the cigarette butts, the footprints. I kept hearing those soft, strange laughs. There was nothing supernatural about it. No myths or monsters. Just people. People out in the woods, laughing in the dark for no reason. People who didn't want to be seen. People watching us, circling us, coming back a second night. And we weren't armed. We had no signal, no protection. We were sitting ducks in a tent. I haven't been camping since. I don't think I ever will again. I still think about what might have happened if we stayed another night. If we didn't wake up. If I hadn't heard them. They weren't ghosts. They were people. And they weren't laughing because something was funny. We left the city just after noon. There were 5 of us, me, Darren, Mo, Talha, and Rayhan. We had all been talking about this camping trip for weeks. It was Rayhan's idea. He said he knew a perfect spot up in the hills, past a place called Shawley Forest. Remote, no reception, surrounded by pine trees and rock ridges. The kind of place where you could hear yourself breathe. That's what he said, and that's what we were looking for. A weekend to disconnect. No phones, no traffic, no noise. The drive took nearly 4 hours. The last stretch was a steep dirt path that chewed up our tires and threw the car around. We parked at a small clearing and hiked the last half mile into the forest. It was nearly dusk when we reached the spot. It wasn't a marked campsite, just a flat piece of ground near a dip in the hillside, a line of trees along one edge, and a fire ring made for blackened stones. It looked like someone had camped there before, but not recently. The leaves and pine needles hadn't been cleared, and there was no sign of footprints. We started setting up the tents. Mo and Talha worked on one, me and Darren on the other. Rayhan walked around gathering wood for the fire. It got cold fast. The sun dropped behind the ridge, and the shadows moved in like a tide. We layered up and moved closer to the fire pit. That's when I noticed the axe. It was leaning against one of the large rocks surrounding the fire ring. Just sitting there, a worn wooden handle, the head blackened with soot and rust. I stared at it for a moment. I was sure none of us had brought one. I had even asked in our group chat the night before. Anyone got an axe or hatchet? Everyone said no. Rayhan said we'd break dead branches or burn them whole. No one had said they'd bring one. But here it was, right by the fire. I said nothing. I just stared. I didn't like how it was there, how it was waiting like someone had been here and just left it behind. Or worse, like they hadn't. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to be that guy. The one who kills the mood before the night's even started. I figured maybe one of the others brought it and forgot to mention it. Or maybe it had just been left there by whoever camped here last. That felt possible. Not likely, but possible. We built the fire using dry branches and old bark. The flames caught and rose up fast. We cooked sausages and potatoes wrapped in foil. We drank cheap beer and passed around a bottle of rum someone brought. The cold backed off a little. We laughed, told old stories from school, took turns poking at the fire. But my eyes kept drifting back to that axe. It didn't move, obviously. It just sat there. But I couldn't stop noticing it. The way the blade caught the light sometimes. The way it was leaning, not just casually set down, but like it had been placed there. Like someone had stood it up to make sure it was ready. The weirdest part was that no one else seemed to notice it. Not even once did any of them mention it. Not when we needed to split kindling. Not when we were feeding the fire. They all just carried on as if it wasn't there. By midnight, the others started turning in. Mo and Talha went first. Then Rayhan, Darren, and I sat by the fire a little longer. The rum was gone. My hands were starting to feel stiff from the cold. I stared into the flames, then at the dark trees beyond. Black trunks. No wind. No sounds but the crackle of wood and the occasional shifting of someone in a sleeping bag inside the tents. Darren finally stood up, stretched, and disappeared into the tent we shared. I sat alone for another 10 minutes. The axe was still there. I got up and walked over to it. I don't know why. I just wanted to see it up close. I picked it up. It was heavy, heavier than it looked. The blade was chipped along the edge, but still looked sharp. The handle was old and worn smooth from use. I stared into the dark beyond the fire, holding it in my hands. Then I set it back exactly where it had been and went into the tent. I didn't sleep well. The cold found its way through my sleeping bag, and every little sound from the woods snapped me awake. Around 3 a.m., I heard something moving outside, just for a few seconds. Not an animal. It was too deliberate. Slow crunching steps, then nothing. I held my breath for so long, I felt lightheaded. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep again. When we woke, it was bright and misty. The fire was just ash and black coals. The axe was gone. I looked around, trying not to panic. I walked the edge of the campsite, checked the spot where it had been. Nothing. I looked behind the trees, behind the tents, even in the bushes downhill a bit. Nothing. I finally asked the others, "Hey, did anyone move that axe?" They all gave me blank looks. And most said, "What axe?" I explained, describing it exactly. Rayhan looked around and said, "I didn't see an axe, man." Talha laughed, thought I was messing with them. Darren said maybe I was dreaming. I told him no. I held it. I picked it up. I remembered the weight. But they all swore they never saw one. That's when I realized it wasn't just that they didn't move it. They never saw it at all. We packed up by noon. I kept scanning the tree line while we worked, looking for shapes, movement, anything. But it was quiet. Too quiet. Even the birds weren't calling. On the hike back, I walked to the rear. Every so often I'd turn around and check behind us. Nothing but empty trail and tall trees. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. Like someone had been out there. Like someone had come to our camp in the night and taken it back. In the car, I sat in the back with my arms crossed, staring out the window. The others were talking and laughing again, like the trip had been normal, like nothing weird happened. I didn't say much. I just kept thinking about the axe. How it showed up. How it disappeared. How no one else saw it. Or claimed to. When I got home, I dumped all my gear and checked the photos on my phone. I had taken a few shots of the fire of the guys sitting around it. In one of the photos, just one, you could see it, leaning against a rock, half in shadow, but clear as day once you looked. I sent the photo to the group chat. No one responded for over an hour. Then Rayhan messaged, "Dude, that wasn't there. I swear." Mo replied next. "That's creepy. I don't remember that at all." Darren finally said, "I don't like this. Don't send stuff like that again." Talha didn't reply at all. I zoomed in on the photo. There was something strange in it. Something I hadn't noticed right away. Just beyond the firelight, in the dark, 2 points of white. Like the reflection off eyes. Watching. I never went camping again after that. I went solo camping last summer in the northern part of the state, somewhere deep in the Pine Barrens. I'd done a few solo trips before, usually only for a night or two, just to get away from people and noise and screens. I like the quiet of the woods. I like not talking, not checking my phone, just being still. This time, I picked a new spot, somewhere I found by looking at old hiking forums and cross-referencing trail maps. It wasn't an official campsite, just a little clearing off a long-forgotten trail that barely showed up anymore. I had to bushwhack most of the way in. I hiked in early afternoon, carrying my pack with everything I needed: tent, sleeping bag, little stove, food, water, first aid kit. I had a compass, a map, and a backup battery for my headlamp. I wasn't reckless. I set up camp in a flat little patch of pine needles, not far from a tiny creek. The sun filtered through the trees in long golden stripes. The air smelled clean and dry, like moss and warm bark. I got the tent pitched, collected some sticks for a fire, and cooked a quick meal, just pasta and some jerky. After eating, I packed up my food in a bag and tied it high between two trees. I don't mess around with animals. I was far enough out that it wouldn't be crazy to run into a black bear or even a stray coyote. The evening was calm. I sat by the fire until it burned low, staring at the coals, just letting the quiet soak in. No cars, no voices, not even the buzz of planes. Just wind moving through the trees, the occasional creak of a branch, and the soft gurgle of the creek. Around 10, I crawled into my tent. It was a small one-person tent, just enough room for me and my bag. I laid out my sleeping bag and zipped myself in. The night air was cool, but not cold. I left the rain flap open so I could see the trees against the stars. I don't know what time I woke up. It was still dark, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. I didn't check. I woke because I felt something. Not heard, not seen. Just felt it. Like how your body knows when someone's watching you. I was on my back, staring up at the dark outline of the ceiling of the tent. My breath was steady, but I didn't move. There was no sound at first, just the faintest wind outside. I told myself it was probably a raccoon or some other small animal nosing around the campsite. Then I heard it, breathing. It was faint at first. Slow, not the kind of sound you imagine. No heavy rasps or growls or any movie-type stuff. Just low, steady breathing. Right outside the tent, inches from my head. It wasn't animal-like. It wasn't fast or panting. It was slow, human-sounding, calm. That was the part that really scared me. It didn't sound like something sneaking or sniffing or stalking. It sounded like someone standing still, breathing through their nose. I didn't move. I kept still as stone. My heart started pounding, thumping in my ears, but I didn't breathe harder. I didn't make a sound. I just listened. The breathing stayed. Right outside. Not walking, not shifting, not sniffing. Just breathing. My tent has 2 layers. Mesh on the inside, and then the outer shell. The mesh was all I had between me and whatever it was. I kept the outer flap pulled back that night, so I could have more airflow. That meant if I moved, if I rolled over or sat up, I'd be able to see right out, and whatever was outside could see in. I thought about grabbing my flashlight. It was inside the tent, near my feet. I didn't dare move my arm. I thought about yelling, but that seemed even dumber. Who would hear me? I was miles from the nearest road. The forest was thick. No one else was camping out here. I chose this place because it was remote. Too remote. The breathing kept going. I couldn't tell how long it lasted. Could have been 2 minutes or 10. But then I heard the shift of weight. Just the smallest scuff of a boot or shoe against the forest floor. That sound sent something sharp down my spine. It wasn't a paw. It wasn't a hoof. It was a shoe. Someone was standing outside my tent, breathing quietly, and had just shifted their feet. Then silence. No breathing. No footsteps. Just the wind again and the distant creak. I stayed frozen for what felt like an hour. I didn't even blink. I waited until the first thin light started to show through the trees. My limbs were stiff, my fingers numb from gripping the inside edge of my sleeping bag. I finally reached down, slowly, grabbed my flashlight and turned it on. Nothing unusual inside the tent. I unzipped it slowly, then opened the outer flap. There were footprints in the pine needles. Clear ones. Not boot prints, not like my hiking boots. These were flat-soled, like sneakers or cheap work shoes. The prints came in from the direction of the creek, stopped right beside my tent, circled around once, and then led off toward the trees. They didn't go back the way they came. They went deeper into the woods. I looked around carefully. No broken branches, no trash, no blood or fur or claw marks. Just those prints. I checked my gear. Everything was untouched. Food bags still hanging, tent fine, nothing missing. But I couldn't stay. I packed everything in under 20 minutes. I didn't eat. I didn't even sit down. Just rolled my gear, packed up the tent, and started moving. I kept the knife from my cook kit in one hand and kept checking behind me every few minutes. I didn't take the trail I used to come in. I cut across the woods, stuck close to the creek until I found an old service road, and followed it out. I didn't see anyone on the way back. No cabins, no signs of other hikers, no cars. When I reached the trailhead parking area, mine was the only vehicle there. Still locked, still untouched. That was the last time I went camping alone. I still don't know who it was. Maybe some drifter, maybe someone living off-grid, maybe just someone who saw a fire from a distance and came to check it out. But whoever it was, they stood outside my tent in the dark, breathing steady, not moving, not talking, just watching. They didn't try to rob me. They didn't try to attack me. They didn't even leave a note. They just came and stood there. That silence was worse than any scream. And even now, sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night in my apartment, safe locked, well lit, I still lie there staring at the ceiling, holding my breath, just listening. Because I swear, sometimes I think I can hear that breathing again. Just for a second, just long enough to remind me it was real. We got to the site around noon. It was deep in the woods, maybe an hour and a half hike from where we parked the car. No service, no other campers, just the sound of wind through the trees and the crunch of our boots on dry leaves. It was me, Josh, and Devin. We'd been camping together since high school, and we always tried to find new, quiet spots like this, off-trail, barely touched. This one we found online in some old hiking forum. No reviews, just GPS coordinates and a couple of blurry photos. That made it perfect for us. The clearing was tight. We managed to find enough flat ground for the 2 tents, and we built a fire pit with some rocks scattered nearby. It took a while to get it all set up, tents pitched, firewood gathered, food unpacked. By the time we sat down around the fire, the sun had started to slip behind the trees. The air cooled fast, but the fire kept us warm. I remember thinking how quiet it was. No bugs, no birds, no distant dogs or car horns. Just the fire crackling and the occasional sound of a branch falling somewhere far in the trees. That night felt normal. We roasted hot dogs on sticks, drank cheap beer from our packs, and stared at the sky until the stars came out. It was one of those skies where you could see everything, thousands of stars, no light pollution, just the dark and the fire and the 3 of us. Eventually we turned in. Josh and Devin shared one tent, and I had my own. We had headlamps, but we didn't use them much. The fire gave off enough glow, and we were all pretty beat. I woke up once in the night. Could have been 2 or 3 in the morning. My back hurt. I always forget how thin the sleeping pads are. I stayed there for a bit, listening. It was dead quiet. No wind, no animals. The kind of silence that doesn't feel right. I remember hearing something soft outside, like a shuffle or a crunch, but I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a squirrel or a deer. I stayed still for a long time, my heart beating a little faster than usual, and then I must have drifted back off. When I got up the next morning, the fire was out and the air was cold. My breath came out in clouds. I stepped out my tent and stretched, knees cracking, neck sore. Josh and Devin were still zipped up in their tent. I figured I'd get the fire going again. As I walked toward the fire pit, I saw something that made me stop. There were footprints in the dirt. Not just mine or the guys. These were fresh. The ground was soft with a layer of damp dirt under the dry leaves, and you could see them clearly. The thing was, there were 2 sets, 2 different patterns, both circling our tents. One set was smaller, maybe a size 9 boot. The other was bigger, wider, almost like work boots. They didn't come from the trail. They came from the woods from the opposite side, and they circled the whole campsite. The smaller ones passed close to my tent. The larger one stayed back, maybe 10 feet away. But both sets moved around us, not just once. The prints overlapped, looped, and backtracked, like whoever it was, or whatever, had been walking in circles around us while we slept. I stared at them for a long time, my mouth dry. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. It wasn't just that someone had come through our sight. It was the way they moved, slow, deliberate, like they were watching. No trash left behind, no broken branches or rushed steps. Just clean, quiet prints in a wide arc. Josh and Devin finally crawled out of their tent, yawning and groggy. I didn't say anything right away. I just pointed to the prints. They looked at them for a few seconds, then looked at each other. No one smiled, no one joked. Josh knelt down, touched the edge of one of the bigger prints. "They're fresh," he said quietly. We spent the next half hour walking the perimeter of the site, following the tracks. They disappeared into the woods on the north side, where it got dense fast. No clear trail, just leaves and underbrush. We debated what to do, though none of us really said anything out loud. It felt like we were thinking the same thing, but didn't want to admit it. Someone had been out here, watching us. Probably more than one person. Maybe hunters, maybe locals, maybe something else. We decided to pack up. No breakfast, no coffee, just tearing down camp in near silence. I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. Every snapping twig made me jump. Every time I turned, I expected to see someone standing there. But there was nothing. By the time we were ready to hike back, it was just after 8. The sun had come up, but it didn't help. The woods felt tight, like they were pressing in on us. The trees blocked most of the light. The trail back wasn't hard, but we moved fast. No breaks, no talking. We only stopped once when Devin said he had to tie his boot. That's when we heard it, a sharp crack from behind us, like a branch breaking underfoot. We froze. I turned and scanned the woods. There was nothing there, just trees still and quiet. But it wasn't a squirrel. It was too loud, too deliberate. It sounded like someone stepped on a dry log. We didn't stop again after that. When we finally got to the car, we threw everything in the trunk without bothering to organize it. As soon as the doors shut, I locked them. Josh drove, white-knuckled on the wheel. No one said anything until we hit the main road. And even then it was just small stuff, "You okay?" And that was messed up. A couple days later, I looked at the photos we took. Not many, just a few from when we set up, some around the fire. But there was one that made my stomach drop. I had taken it just before we went to bed, from inside my tent, with the flap open. You could see the fire dying down and the other tent in the background. Nothing looked wrong at first, but when I zoomed in, just beyond the firelight to the left of the other tent, there was someone partially visible. Just the edge of a figure, barely lit by the glow. It was too far to see a face or details, but you could make out a shape. Someone standing there, halfway behind a tree, watching. I didn't show the others. I just deleted the photo and sat on my bed for a long time, thinking about how close they had been. Not just once, but probably for a long time. Maybe the whole night. Maybe longer. We never went back to that spot. We didn't talk about it much after that, either. It was like we didn't want to give it weight. But I still think about those footprints. The slow circle around our tents. The silence. The distance someone kept, just far enough not to wake us. And I wonder if it was the first time they did it, or just the first time we noticed. I've booked the cabin for a quiet weekend away from everything. I've been feeling burnout for months, and I just needed to get away from city noise, work stress, my phone constantly buzzing. The listing said the place was about 20 minutes off a forest road. No other people nearby, just trees, trails, and a small lake. That's exactly what I wanted. The rental company sent me clear directions. I followed the narrow gravel road off the highway for what felt like forever, winding through dense forest until I saw the small wooden sign that matched the photo they'd emailed. The cabin itself was simple but cozy. Small porch, 2 rocking chairs, old wooden siding that had probably been there for decades. It had electricity, running water, and a wood stove. Nothing fancy. It was perfect. When I got there, it was late afternoon. The sun was dropping behind the trees, and the whole area was quiet in a way you never hear in the city. No cars, no people, just wind brushing through pine needles and the occasional chirp from a bird somewhere high above. The air smelled clean, almost sweet like dry bark and moss. I parked the car, unloaded my bags, and settled in. The inside of the cabin was basic. One main room with a small kitchen, a table, a couch, and a separate bedroom off to the side. There were a few old books on a shelf, dusty board games, and a binder from the rental company with check-in instructions and safety tips. One line caught my eye. It said, "The neighboring cabin 200 feet to the west is not in use and has been locked and vacant since last season." I looked out the side window toward where the other cabin would be. Through the trees, I could just make out a corner of a roof, barely visible. I figured they left that note so no one would think someone else was staying nearby. Honestly, I liked the idea that it was just me out there. Total silence. No one to bother me. No one watching. That night, I made a simple dinner, drank a beer, and sat on the porch until it got too cold. I went inside, stoked the wood stove, and read a bit before bed. Everything was peaceful, the kind of quiet that makes you notice your own heartbeat. I woke up in the middle of the night, needing to use the bathroom. It was cold, and the stove had gone out. I grabbed a flashlight and stumbled toward the bathroom. On my way back, I passed by the front window and happened to glance outside. Through the trees, past the driveway, toward the direction of the other cabin, I saw light. It was faint, yellow, and flickering like an old bulb turning on and off. At first, I thought it was my eyes adjusting. I rubbed them and looked again. It was definitely a light, and it was coming from a window in that other cabin. I stood there for a while, not moving, just watching. It flickered again, then went out completely. A second later, it came back, but dimmer. It kept doing that for almost a minute, off, then on, then off, like someone testing a switch. Then it stopped altogether. I told myself it was probably something simple, maybe motion-activated security or a loose wire, or even something inside the wall tripping the power. Still, the binder had said no one was staying there, and I didn't see any other cars when I arrived. The next morning, I got up and tried to shake it off. I told myself I was being paranoid. I've been looking for peace and quiet, and now that I had it, my mind was trying to fill in the silence with made-up problems. I went for a hike. There were a few trails nearby, all marked by faded wooden signs. I took the one that looped around the lake. It was muddy in spots, but the air was crisp, and I didn't see another person the whole time. I was out for maybe 3 hours. By the time I got back, the sun was starting to lower again, and shadows were already creeping in around the base of the trees. I sat on the porch for a while and kept looking through the trees toward the other cabin. It was quiet. Still, no sign of anything strange. That night, I built a fire outside in the fire pit and sat alone under the stars. The woods were dark, darker than I expected. Without streetlights or anything around, the sky felt enormous. After a while, I started to relax again. But sometime after I went to bed, I woke up again. This time it wasn't the cold or needing the bathroom. It was something else. I couldn't explain it. A feeling like I was being pulled awake by something just out of reach. I lay there for a while, eyes open in the dark, trying to listen. Then I saw it again, the light. Through the thin curtains of the bedroom window, I caught the flickering glow against the trees. I sat up, walked slowly to the front window, and looked out. This time, the light in the other cabin stayed on longer. Not flickering, just a steady glow, like someone had turned on a lantern or an old lamp. I watched for a long time, heart beating faster. Then I noticed something else. The door. The cabin's door was slightly open. Not swinging, not wide, but cracked open maybe a foot. I could see the line of yellow light spilling out onto the porch. That didn't make sense. The rental company said it had been locked for months. Why would the door be open now? I stood there for maybe 10 minutes. I didn't move, just stared. Nothing else happened. The light stayed on. The door stayed open. Eventually, I forced myself to go back to bed. I didn't sleep much. Every little creak in the cabin made me sit up and listen. I didn't look out the window again. By morning, I was tense and tired. The light was off again. I ate breakfast fast and decided to walk over to the other cabin. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. I just needed to see it up close. I couldn't keep imagining things. I followed the edge of the trees, stepping through patches of thick grass and uneven ground. When I got close enough, I saw the building was in worse shape than mine. Peeling paint, moss growing up one side, half the front steps sagging under their own weight. I walked up the steps carefully. The door was shut now, closed tight. I knocked, even though I knew I shouldn't. Nothing. I tried the handle. It was locked. I walked around the side, looked in the windows. Inside was empty. No furniture, no lights, nothing. Just a bare room with dusty floorboards and cobwebs. It didn't look like anyone had been inside recently. I walked back, feeling confused and unsettled. If the lights weren't real, then what had I seen? And if they were real, how could the place be empty? I tried to distract myself the rest of the day. Read, cooked, went down to the water, and skipped rocks. But the whole time, I kept thinking about that door, that light, that feeling I had in the middle of the night. That evening, I almost packed up and left. But I'd paid for the whole weekend, and I didn't want to be the kind of person who ran off just because of a weird feeling. I told myself again and again, there's a logical explanation. Still, before bed, I locked every door and window. Double-checked them. I left the lights on inside. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up again. I didn't hear anything, but I knew. I got up, heart already racing. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. I peeked out through the curtain. The light in the other cabin was on again, but the door wasn't just open this time. It was wide open. The inside of the cabin was lit, though I couldn't see the source. Just that yellow light spilling out like someone was standing in the doorway, waiting. I backed away from the window and went to get my keys. I shoved everything into my backpack as fast as I could. I didn't brush my teeth, didn't check if I'd forgotten anything. I grabbed everything I could carry and walked straight to the car. I didn't look toward the cabin again. I just got in, turned the engine on, and drove. The gravel road out felt longer this time. Every twist and turn felt wrong, like I was going in circles. The trees closed in tighter the farther I went, and I kept checking the rearview mirror. Eventually, I saw the highway and pulled out, my tires spitting gravel onto the pavement. I drove for hours before I stopped at a gas station near a town I didn't even know the name of. I called the rental company the next day from home. I told them about the lights, about the door, about what I saw. They emailed me back, saying there's no power running to the other cabin. The electrical line was disconnected last fall after a tree fell on it. No one had been out there to fix it. The door, they said, was still padlocked when their guy checked it after I left. I didn't reply. I didn't ask more questions. I didn't leave a review. All I know is I'll never go back there. Not to that forest. Not to that road. And definitely not to that cabin with the light that shouldn't have been on. In 2004, my girlfriend and I decided to get away for the weekend and rented a small, cheap cabin on a lake. We wanted something quiet, secluded, just us and nature. The place we found was about a 2-hour drive from the city, way out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by pine trees, and sitting just a few steps from the water. It wasn't anything fancy, definitely not luxurious, but it had the basic stuff: a kitchen, a bathroom, a little living room, a couple of worn-out beds, and the main selling point for her, a fireplace. She was obsessed with it. She had this thing about fireplaces because apparently her childhood home had one, and when her parents divorced and sold the place, she never got over it. So she was unusually excited to sit in front of this tiny old fireplace like it was some big life milestone. When we got there that Friday afternoon, I brought in the bags while she walked through the cabin, giggling and clapping like a little kid. She kept talking about how she wanted to make s'mores and maybe even fall asleep in front of the fire like in a movie. I was just happy to be away from everything. It was about 4 p.m. when we were settled in. She started begging me to start a fire right then and there, but I told her we should wait until later when it gets dark. I suggested we go fishing first, just enjoy the lake while we had daylight. She wasn't thrilled, but agreed after I promised to make s'mores that night and build the fire exactly how she wanted it. But she made me at least get the firewood ready. So I dragged one of the bundles inside and unwrapped it right there on the living room floor. While I was pulling the logs apart and stacking them next to the hearth, something shot out from inside the bundle. At first, I thought it was a worm or maybe a mouse, but then I saw the long, thin, squirming body, a snake. A milk snake, although I didn't know that at the time. It had red and black and white rings on it, which looked pretty damn dangerous to me. I dropped the log I was holding and jumped back like someone had pulled a gun. My girlfriend screamed louder than I've ever heard anyone scream in my life. The snake didn't make any noise, but slithered quickly across the floor, disappeared behind a dusty chair in the corner, and was just gone. We ran out of that cabin so fast, it was like we were being chased. We stopped when we got to the dock, catching our breath, both of us freaked out beyond reason. I had no idea if that snake was poisonous, and we were far away from anything resembling a hospital. I pulled out my phone and left this panicked message on the voicemail of the rental office, telling them there was a deadly snake in the cabin and that we needed someone to come get it out. I didn't get an answer, just a machine, but I hoped someone would hear it soon. My girlfriend refused to go back inside, and honestly, I didn't want to either. To calm her down, I suggested we take the boat out onto the lake for a while. The sky was starting to turn golden from the setting sun, and the water was calm, smooth as glass. We floated out there for about an hour, letting the wind and silence settle her nerves. After a while, she started to relax. I even got her to laugh a little. The fresh air helped both of us. When we came back, I noticed something strange. The screen door to the cabin was now shut. I had left it open when we ran out. I was sure of it. I figured maybe one of the maintenance guys had come by while we were out and taken care of the snake. I didn't see any cars or trucks nearby, but I convinced myself that the problem had been handled. We went inside cautiously. I poked around the living room first, checked under the chair and around the fireplace, but I didn't see anything. No sign of the snake. I decided to go ahead and build the fire to keep my promise. She sat down in front of it on the old braided rug and watched the flames start to grow. Eventually, she leaned her head on my shoulder, and we just sat there, the warm flicker of the fire lighting up the wood-paneled walls. For a moment, everything felt all right again. We roasted marshmallows, made s'mores, and even talked about maybe coming back in the winter when the lake froze over. It was one of those rare, peaceful nights. But that peace didn't last. Sometime around 8 or 9 p.m., we both heard a sound. It came from a hallway that led to the bathroom and back bedrooms. At first it was faint, like dragging feet or something heavy shuffling. Then it got clearer. It sounded like claws tapping on the wood floor, quick and deliberate, almost like those clicking noises the raptors made in Jurassic Park. I sat up immediately. My heart jumped into my throat. She looked at me with wide eyes. The first thought that shot into my head was that the snake had somehow grown legs. Or maybe it had never been a snake to begin with. Maybe it was something worse. I grabbed a blanket and the fire poker. The poker was this heavy iron rod with a twisted handle and a sharp hook at the end, almost like the Saints football team's logo. My idea was to throw the blanket over whatever it was and beat it into the floor until it stopped moving. I moved slowly down the hallway, gripping the poker tight in one hand and the blanket in the other. The hallway was mostly dark, with just a bit of light flickering from the fireplace behind me. As I stepped closer to the bathroom, I saw a large shape crouched in the shadows near the doorway. It was too big to be a snake. It looked feathery, hunched and round. Before I could make sense of what I was seeing, the thing launched forward. It came at me with speed and fury. I fell backwards and scrambled into the living room. My girlfriend screamed behind me. The thing didn't stop. It charged in after me, flapping and shrieking. In the firelight, I finally saw what it was. A turkey. A full-grown, massive, puffed-up wild turkey. It was hissing, its wings flared out, its chest puffed, and its eyes like black beads, angry and focused. It must have gotten into the cabin while we were out on the boat, maybe chasing after the snake. It was now completely nuts, charging around the room, knocking over chairs, and smashing into walls like it wanted to fight everyone in the house. I swung the poker at it, catching it once in the side. It screamed and flapped harder. It came at me again, pecking and clawing. I hit it again, this time harder, square in the body. It stumbled but kept coming. Finally, I swung the poker like a bat and caught it across the head with the hooked end. It was a loud crack. The turkey dropped like a sack of wet cement, twitched once, then lay still. We stood there in silence, staring at it. The only sound was the crackling of the fire. I wrapped the turkey in the same blanket and carried it outside. I put it in the bed of my truck and drove straight to the rental office, which was still open but had only one guy behind the counter. a long-haired dude who looked like he spent most of his days half-stoned. I told him what happened, thanked him for removing the snake, and handed him the turkey. He looked confused, but didn't say much. The next day, I got a call from him. He told me he'd finally listened to my message from the day before. No one had gone out to the cabin. No one had removed the snake. But while cleaning the turkey, he said his brother was planning to cook it. They found the snake in its stomach, swallowed whole. That turkey had come into the cabin chasing the snake and probably caught it while we were out on the lake. That's why it had been in the bathroom, and that's why it went completely insane. It was probably still half crazed from the fight. I didn't know turkeys ate snakes. I didn't even know they could kill them. So yeah, turns out the turkey saved us from the snake. We just didn't know at the time. We packed up that morning and didn't stay the second night. On the drive back, my girlfriend said she still loved the fireplace, but maybe next time we should try a hotel with central heating. I didn't argue, and now, every time I see a turkey, on TV, in the store, wherever, I think about that night, that fire, and that damn demon bird charging out of the dark like it wanted my soul. And now you know, turkeys eat snakes. It was the middle of summer, a few years back, and me and 3 of my closest mates decided we'd do a bit of wild camping. Nothing fancy, just a cheap tent, some sleeping bags, a cooler full of cheap food and warm drinks, and a big open field somewhere in the countryside of England. I can't even remember the name of the place we camped exactly, just that it was quiet, way out from town, and surrounded by waist-high grass with a line of trees way off in the distance. The sort of place where no one would bother you, and you could stay up late, drink, talk rubbish, and not worry about anything or anyone. We got there in the late afternoon, after stopping by a petrol station to grab snacks and drinks. We parked just off the side of the narrow country road, carried our stuff through the field, and found a fairly flat bit of ground to pitch the tent. It took a while to set it up. None of us were exactly outdoorsmen. Holes kept bending, and no one read the instructions. But after about an hour of shouting and swearing, we got it up. It was a big dome-style tent, cheap and cheerful, just enough room for the 4 of us if we lay side by side. No real space to move around inside, but we didn't plan on doing much except sleeping in there. That night was normal. We sat around on our folding chairs, passed around a speaker playing old rock songs, shared a few beers, told stories, laughed, and just enjoyed being out in the open. The air had that warm, dry smell of grass and dirt, and there were no streetlights, no cars, no background noise at all. Just wind rustling through the grass and the occasional distant sound of some bird or animal out in the woods. It felt peaceful, like one of those memories you think back on years later with a smile. Eventually, the temperature dropped a bit and we started getting tired. We zipped up the tent, got into our sleeping bags, and lay there talking quietly for a bit. Like idiots, we were telling each other scary stories. You know the sort: ghosts, haunted houses, murderers in the woods. I remember at one point, one of the lads mentioned a story about an old headless farmer or something, some dumb thing he claimed to have read online. We all laughed it off, of course. We were grown men, or at least we thought we were. But still, you know how it is when you're lying in the dark with nothing but a thin layer of fabric between you and the world. Everything feels a bit more intense. We must have drifted off sometime around 2 or 3 in the morning. I was just getting into a light sleep, half awake, half out of it, when I heard one of my friends, James, let out a sharp, panic scream. Not like a startled yelp. I mean a full-on scream, like the kind that makes your whole body go tense instantly. I sat bolt upright, heart hammering, sleep completely gone. The other 2 shot up too, all of us disoriented, squinting in the dark, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. James was sitting up in a sleeping bag, wide-eyed, breathing hard, sweat running down his forehead, even though it was cool. He kept pointing to the back corner of the tent and muttering. There was a head, just a head, floating. None of us knew what to say. We were too confused, too freaked out by how genuinely terrified he looked. He wasn't messing about. He wasn't laughing. His voice was shaking. You could see the whites of his eyes, darting around the dark tent like he was expecting something to jump at him. He said the head was just there, in the corner, not attached to a body, just a man's head, hanging in the air about a foot or so off the ground, like it was lying on an invisible pillow. He said the face was looking straight at him, eyes open and wide, mouth moving as if it was speaking, but no sound, just moving lips. We all looked. Nothing was there. Just our bags, a couple of shoes, someone's water bottle. The tent was dead silent. But that didn't matter. Once someone plants an image like that in your head, it sticks. I couldn't stop picturing it. The shape, the expression, the mouth moving without sound. And the more I thought about it, the less I could convince myself it was just a dream or a trick of the light. James was shaking. We had to calm him down. But truth is, none of us were okay after that. No one wanted to lie back down. No one wanted to turn off the torch. We just sat there in that cramped little tent, backs against the fabric, knees pulled up to our chests, staring at that empty corner like it was going to sprout something awful. The air inside started feeling hotter, like we'd all been holding our breath for too long. Outside, the field was dead quiet. Not even the wind moved anymore. No insects, no birds, nothing. Just this awful stillness pressing in from all sides. No one spoke. For hours. I remember checking my phone at 4:17 a.m. It felt like time had frozen. All of us were waiting for something, some noise, some movement. But nothing happened. Not a thing. As soon as the sky started to lighten, just the faintest hint of blue over the tops of the trees, we were up. No one said a word. We didn't even pack properly. We just shoved everything into bags, collapsed the tent in a rush without folding it, and carried it all back to the car like we were being chased. I remember looking back at the field one last time, just to check, I guess. There was nothing, just grass, a few broken beer bottles, our flattened patch of ground. We drove home in silence. The radio was off. Everyone looked tired and pale. No one talked about it for a long time. Later, weeks later, we tried to explain it away. Maybe James was half asleep and hallucinated it. Maybe a shadow played tricks on his eyes. Maybe it was the mix of alcohol, tiredness, and ghost stories. But even saying all that, none of us really believed it. Because it wasn't just what he saw. It was how real his fear was. How it affected all of us. We never went camping together again. Not once. That was the last trip. And we definitely never told ghost stories around the tent after that. The cabin wasn't much, just a small weathered box sitting on a rise in the middle of thick Tennessee woods. We found it online for cheap, 3 nights for friends, and not much else. It had power, running water, 2 bedrooms, a busted but working fireplace, and a porch that sagged like an old man's back. None of us cared. We were looking for quiet, a place to drink, laugh, and get off our phones for a while. We were all 20-something, tired of jobs and cities and always being connected. The first night passed like any camping trip. We grilled burgers, drank beer, played cards, told dumb stories. The wind rustled through the trees, and the nearest house was miles away. No cell signal, which we actually liked. The only way we could call out was over the landline phone in the kitchen, one of those yellowed push-button ones from the 90s. We joked about it being a murder cabin, half expecting a bear to show up or something, but really, it just felt old and quiet. The only thing that fell off was the smell under the porch, wet wood and something musty, but that didn't seem weird for a place like this. Second night, just after dinner, I dropped my flashlight through the gaps in the porch boards. It was one of those rubber ones with a heavy battery pack that clattered like hell when it hit the ground. I crouched down, tried to reach for it, but my fingers couldn't grab it. So I went around the side and ducked under the porch. It was cramped. Cobwebs brushed my arms, and I could feel dirt sticking to my palms. The flashlight beam danced over dead leaves and empty bottles someone must have left years ago. And that's when I saw the glow. It was soft and bluish, just a few feet away, tucked against the wall of the cabin. A phone. I froze. It was turned on. The screen was lit, and the camera app was open. There was no lock screen. Just a camera view. My flashlight reflected off the glass. I grabbed it without thinking, half expecting it to be a dead, useless shell, but it was warm in my hand. I backed out and showed the guys. We sat on the living room floor and went through it. The phone wasn't password protected. Nothing fancy about it. Old Android, cracked screen, 27% battery left. The gallery opened right up. The The photos were recent. All of them. The first few were random shots of the woods, the porch, some blurry night shots. But then they changed. There were pictures of us. Not taken from inside, not ones we'd taken ourselves. They were taken from outside the cabin, through the windows. Most of them were close-ups of our faces, zoomed in or from low angles. The kind of angles you get if you were crawling or crouched. One of me laughing with a beer in my hand. One of Caleb grilling. One of Jake brushing his teeth in the window. All taken without us knowing. All from under the porch or outside the windows. Then we found the last one. It was a 10-second video. We played it. The sound was muffled, but you could hear us talking, laughing, silverware clinking on plates. The video was shot through the living room window. You could see the four of us sitting at the table, eating dinner. None of us had seen or heard anyone. We locked the doors. All of them. There weren't many, just the front and back, and a window in the bathroom that didn't quite shut all the way. We dragged a table in front of the back door and kept the fireplace poker close. We turned off all the lights inside and lit a few candles. Every time one of us got up to use the bathroom or grab something from the kitchen, the rest would flinch. We felt like rats inside a glass cage, being watched. We took shifts. Jake and Caleb stayed up first while I tried to sleep on the couch. I couldn't. My stomach wouldn't calm down, and every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone crouched just outside the window, face pressed against the glass. I finally drifted off a little after midnight. Caleb woke me up at around 1. He whispered, "There's someone out back." That sentence hit me like a slap. I sat up slowly, heart already hammering. The cabin was dead quiet, except for the crackling of the dying fire. I followed Caleb to the back window, and he pointed. There was a figure standing at the tree lean, not moving, just standing there. Not close, but close enough to see the outline. Could have been a man. Could have been wearing a hood. I couldn't tell. The trees behind him were thick, and the moonlight wasn't strong enough to make out much. We stared for what felt like 10 minutes. It never moved. It just watched. Caleb whispered, "I'm going out there." I told him not to, but he already had the poker in his hand and was walking to the door before I could stop him. He didn't run, but he moved fast. I followed him out. The cold slapped me across the face. We both charged toward the spot, yelling. But there was nothing. When we reached the tree lean, it was empty. The ground was covered in dry leaves and pine needles, and there wasn't a single footprint, not even broken branches. Just silence. We turned our flashlights in every direction, calling out, but no one answered. We stood out there for another 10 minutes, swinging the beams in circles, before we finally gave up and went back in. No one slept after that. We sat around the cold fireplace, bags under our eyes, checking the windows every few minutes. We waited for the sun. When the sky finally turned pink, we grabbed everything, bags, clothes, coolers, gear, and threw in the back of Jake's SUV. We didn't even clean up. We didn't care about getting the deposit back. We just wanted to get off that mountain. The drive down was long and quiet. The tires crunched over gravel and dirt until we hit the main road. It was only then that we started to breathe normally again. The trees got less dense. The sky opened up. We didn't talk much, just kept glancing at the rearview mirror. About 20 minutes down, my phone buzzed. Somehow, I had a signal again. One new message. It was from a number I didn't recognize. No name, just 10 digits. I opened it. The message said, "Asterisk, you left too soon." I wasn't done yet. Asterisk. My skin went cold. I showed the others. We checked the phone we found. Same number. That was the last straw. We pulled over and smashed the phone on a rock until the screen was just glass dust. We tossed the remains into a creek we passed and drove without stopping until we hit the nearest town. We never went back. We never called the cabin's owner. We never reported it. None of us wanted our names attached to anything like that. We talked about it once, maybe twice after that trip, but mostly we just let it die. But sometimes, late at night, I still wonder how long they were watching us, and if they were already under the porch before we even arrived. The cabin was smaller than it looked in the pictures. It sat at the edge of the woods, tucked between thin pine trees that swayed like they were whispering. There was no one around for miles, just a dirt road that twisted its way back toward town. The air smelled like damp leaves and old wood. When I stepped inside, the place was cool and quiet, the kind of quiet that made you listen to your own breathing. I dropped my bag by the couch and walked through the place slowly, letting the stillness settle in. There was a small fireplace with blackened bricks, a single bed with a heavy quilt, a dusty bookshelf with a few old novels and trail maps. The kitchen was bare bones, just a sink, a fridge, and a few cabinets. I opened them all, checked the drawers, just to know what was there. I like doing that in new places, getting familiar with every corner. Made it easier to sleep. The cabin was clean, but not fresh. Like no one had stayed there in a while. The fridge was empty. The floor creaked in places. The windows had smudges where rain had dried, but it felt solid. Remote, but not dangerous. I had rented it for a quiet weekend to get away from people, from screens, from everything. I didn't want cell service. I didn't want noise. I just wanted to be alone. I found a guest logbook on the coffee table. One of those thick hardcover books, brown leather cover, a little worn at the edges. I picked it up without thinking much. I always liked reading what other people wrote. Usually it was boring, stuff like love the view or great place to unwind. But sometimes there were strange entries, little details that stuck with you. Once, in another cabin years ago, someone had written didn't sleep well, kept hearing scratching on the roof. Stuff like that. This logbook was only about half full. The first page was dated almost 8 years back. People had written neatly in blue or black pen. Some signed their full names, some just first names. There were little drawings in the margins, trees, mountains, a dog. A couple of pages had long notes about trails they'd hiked or how they'd cooked over the fire pit out back. One page had a flattened leaf taped to it. Another had a coffee ring. Then I flipped the page and saw it. There was a torn edge. Not clean. Someone had ripped out the whole page, right from the binding. The jagged edge was still stuck in the seam, like whoever did it had rushed. The paper after was still there, but it caught my eye right away. My name was written at the top of that next page. First and last, clear as day, written in black ink, smooth, careful handwriting. But it wasn't mine. I hadn't touched the logbook until that moment. Under my name was the date, yesterday's date. I hadn't even arrived until this morning. I sat still for a long minute, just holding the book open in my hands. I kept staring at it like it would change. My name, the date, and nothing else on the page. No message, no other notes. Just that. The rest of the lines were empty. It wasn't possible. I hadn't told anyone I was coming here. I'd booked the cabin through a small local site. No reviews, no big listing. Just a phone call and a mailed key. It wasn't even under my name on the lease. I'd use a friend's name to keep things private. My real name should not have been in that book, especially not in someone else's handwriting before I'd arrived. I checked the front door again. Locked. I went through the cabin a second time, slower this time. Every room, every window. I opened the closet, the tiny bathroom. I checked under the bed, even though it felt stupid. There was nothing. No sign anyone else had been there. Still, I couldn't relax. The logbook stayed open on the table. I walked around for a while, outside the cabin, trying to clear my head. I checked the dirt around the cabin, half expecting to find boot prints or tire marks. There were none, just the ones I made when I arrived. I kept circling the place like I was going to find something. I didn't. Later that afternoon, I brought the logbook back to the couch and stared at the torn page. I tried to imagine what was on it, why it was ripped out, who had written my name. I ran my thumb along the edge, feeling how uneven it was, like the page had been yanked quickly. I imagined someone sitting where I was, writing it down. Someone who knew my name and when I was coming. I checked the rest of the logbook. The last entry before the torn page was from 2 weeks ago. A couple named Warren and Shelley. They wrote about hearing coyotes at night and burning marshmallows over the fire pit. Nothing strange. Before that, another entry from last month. Nothing stood out. No mention of anyone staying alone. No warnings. That night, I locked the door and shoved a chair under the handle just in case. I didn't usually scare easily, but the thought of someone knowing I was here before I arrived unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. I kept the logbook on the small table next to the bed. I woke up a few times just to check it was still there. The next morning, I decided to hike down to the ranger station. It wasn't close, maybe 3 miles out, but I needed to talk to someone. I needed to ask if anyone had been up here lately, if maybe someone was screwing around. I didn't mention the logbook, just asked if anyone else had used the cabin recently, or if anyone ever came up to clean it between guests. The ranger was helpful, but didn't know much. Said people usually left the cabin alone. It was one of the least used ones on their registry. Most people booked it once and never came back. He laughed when he said it. I didn't. I walked back slower, thinking through every possibility. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone who worked there had seen the reservation and thought it would be funny, but it didn't feel like a joke. It felt planned, specific. When I got back, the logbook was still on the table. I picked it up again. This time, I checked the inside of the cover. Sometimes people write things there, emergency numbers, Wi-Fi passwords, stuff like that. There wasn't a password, but there was a name. It was written faintly in pencil. R. Tanner. Property of. The pencil had been smudged, but I could make it out. I looked back through the book to see if anyone named R. Tanner had signed it. No one had. I flipped every page again. Still nothing. I searched the cabin for anything with that name. Nothing in the drawers, the shelves, not even under the sink. But in the back of the closet, behind an old folded blanket, I found a small notebook. Spiral bound, pages yellowed with age. Most of it was filled with lists, food items, gear locations. But a few pages had names. Full names, first and last, written in a blocky style, like someone trying to print neatly. And there was my name again, at the bottom of one list, underlined twice. That was enough. I packed up my bag and left that hour. Didn't even bother making the bed or cleaning the dishes. I drove straight back down the dirt road and didn't stop until I hit the highway. I didn't tell anyone about what happened for weeks. Not even my friend whose name I'd used to book the place. When I finally talked about it, I left out some of the details, the list, the notebook, the smudged name. It sounded too strange, too much like I was making it up. But I know what I saw. Someone was expecting me, before I ever arrived, and I still don't know why. When I was a kid, my dad and I went fishing every summer. Same spot every time. A set of campgrounds about a 4-hour drive from where we lived. It was mostly tents and RVs, but there were 6 old cabins there too, lined up in a row off a dirt road, not far from the lake. We always stayed in cabin 3 or 4. My dad liked cabin 4 best because it was close enough to the lake trail, but far enough from the communal fire pit and showers that you didn't hear people too much at night. After he died, I didn't go back for a couple years. Just didn't feel right without him. When I was 19, I finally decided to go again. Alone this time. I told myself it was about fishing, maybe thinking back on some memories, but honestly I think I just wanted to see if it felt the same. I booked cabin 4. Nothing fancy, just an old wooden structure with a rusty stove, a thin mattress on a creaky bed frame, a bare light bulb on the ceiling, and a toilet with a curtain instead of a door. The smell inside was always the same, damp wood and something like old matches. Familiar and a little sad. The cabins were numbered 1 through 6. Cabin 6 was 2 doors down from mine, right at the end of the line, past the overgrown trail to the river. I remembered it from when I was younger because it had been boarded up even back then. My dad had said there was a fire in there once, and no one had stayed in it since. He didn't talk about it much, and I never really asked. The windows were covered with thick plywood, the door chained shut with a rusted lock. Every year, it looked more abandoned. The first 2 nights were quiet. I fished during the day, read a little, cooked on the stove when the fire pit was too much trouble. There were only 2 other cabins occupied that week, both on the other end, near cabin 1. I barely saw the people, just caught glimpses of them walking down toward the lake in the mornings. The nights were what I came for. Dead silent, except for the wind in the trees and the occasional creak of a squirrel on the roof or something scurrying through the bushes. On my second night, I got up to use the toilet around 1 in the morning. It was cold. I remember standing there, half asleep, staring at the wood grain on the cabin wall when something caught my eye. A soft light. I turned and looked through the side window, the one that faced down the line toward cabin 6. There was a light in the window. At first, I thought it might have been a reflection or something. I blinked and leaned closer. No mistake. It was faint, but it was definitely there. a soft yellow glow shining behind one of the plywood boards that didn't quite sit flush against the frame. I stood there staring for at least 30 seconds, not breathing much, just trying to figure it out. There was no power in that cabin, and it had been sealed for years. The next morning, I walked to the main office near the trailhead. The groundskeeper was a guy in his 50s with a gut and a permanent frown. I asked him, real casual, if anyone was staying in cabin 6. He looked up from the paper he was reading and shook his head. That one's been empty a long time, he said. No power in there either. What? I told him I thought I saw a light, but he just shrugged. Probably the moon. Nothing in there but ash and broken glass. I nodded and left, but something about the way he said it, too quick, too final, put me off. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept looking out the window every 20 minutes or so, but cabin 6 stayed dark, completely black. Then came a third night. I was lying in bed, just staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind. It was cold again, and I had wrapped my sleeping bag around myself, trying to stay warm. I remember glancing at the stove and thinking I should have lit a fire earlier. Then I heard it. 3 slow knocks. Not on the door, on the wall. The back wall, the one that faced cabin 6. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't loud. More like someone tapping slowly with their knuckles, or maybe a stick. I didn't move at first. My heart felt like it had just dropped into my stomach. I sat there, frozen, staring at the wall. After maybe 30 seconds, I pulled the covers off and stood up. My legs were stiff and my mouth felt dry. I walked slowly to the window and pushed one of the slats on the blinds just enough to peek through. A figure stood between the cabins. Not moving, not swaying, just standing there. I couldn't see a face. It looked like a man, tall, broad shoulders, maybe wearing a jacket. He was about 20 feet away, standing on a narrow strip of dirt that ran behind the cabins. Right outside the window, I stared for a while, then finally shouted, "Hey!" The figure turned. I didn't hear footsteps, but walked slowly back toward cabin 6. Not in a hurry, just turned and went. It disappeared into the shadows near the boarded-up front door. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the chair near the stove with my pocket knife in my hand and a flashlight on the table. I kept looking at the wall where the knocks came from. I kept thinking about how the figure didn't run. Like it wasn't surprised. Like it knew I'd be watching. The sun came up around 5. I waited until 7 to step outside. The air was cold and smelled like wet pine. I walked slowly around the side of my cabin toward the back wall. The dirt between cabin 4 and cabin 6 was hard-packed, but had some pine needles and leaves scattered over it. No clear footprints. Then I saw it. Something stuck to the wall right below the window. A photo, black and white, curled at the edges from moisture. It was stuck there with a nail, an old, bent nail like the kind you'd find in a barn wall. I pulled it off and looked closer. It was a picture of me, sleeping. The angle was from inside the cabin. I could see the bed, the corner of the stove, even my backpack lying on the floor. I was curled in the sleeping bag, facing the wall, mouth slightly open. It wasn't a copy of an old photo or anything. It was recent. My hair was the same. I had a bandage on my thumb from when I'd cut myself gutting a trout the day before. It was me, from this trip. I checked the cabin from top to bottom, every inch, under the bed, inside the stove, behind the curtain near the toilet. There weren't many places to hide, but I checked anyway. The windows were locked from the inside. The door too. There were no signs of anyone coming in or out. I packed up and left before noon. I didn't stop to tell the groundskeeper. I didn't even take the food out of the stove. I drove straight home, checking my mirrors every few minutes like I expected someone to be following me. That was 2 years ago. I haven't been back since. Sometimes I wake up at night thinking I heard those 3 knocks again. Sometimes I dream about the photo. I still have it. I keep it in a drawer at the bottom of my desk. I don't show it to anyone. I don't want to explain it. I don't even want to look at it again. But I haven't thrown it away. I just want to know who took it and how they got inside. It was a warm weekend in late spring when I decided to head out to a biker rally a few hours from home. One of those multi-day events out in the countryside. Cheap beer, loud music, bikes lined up everywhere, and people from all over. The kind of place where you don't need to know anyone, but you'll still find yourself passing around bottles and stories by a fire before the night's over. I drove my car out there. Didn't feel like riding this time, just wanted the convenience of tossing all my gear in the back and not worrying about weather. I brought a decent-sized tent, camp chair, some food, and more than enough beer. Set up camp right next to the car, no more than 15 feet from it. The sun was still up when I finished, and already the place was alive. Music blasting, engines rumbling, laughter echoing over the sound of revving pipes. People were scattered all around the open field, tents popping up at different angles, bikes and cars parked in clusters, fires starting here and there. By nightfall, the party was in full swing. I walked around for a while, ended up talking with a couple guys from Georgia and a group from Indiana. Sat by their fire a while, shared some food and a few beers, then wandered back to my camp. The stars were out, air cool, but not cold. The kind of weather that makes you appreciate the night even more. I sat in my chair a while, watching people still moving around in the distance, then climbed into my tent around 1:30 or so. My tent had mesh windows on the sides and front. I left the rain fly off for airflow, since it wasn't supposed to rain. I zipped the windows closed, but kept the flap open a bit for a breeze. My car was parked just outside, close enough to feel like a little safety barrier, even though I wasn't worried about much. I'm not a small guy, and these rallies, while rowdy, are usually full of good people. Everyone's there for the same reason: ride, drink, have fun, maybe forget about regular life for a bit. I must have been asleep for an hour or so when something woke me. Not a loud sound, but sharp enough to snap me out of deep sleep. I blinked, looked around, and heard it again. Someone was trying to open my car door. Not gently either. It was loud, fast, and aggressive, like someone yanking on a handle over and over. I sat up fast, heart kicking into gear. My head cleared quick. I wasn't drunk, hadn't even had that much to drink earlier. I reached for my pants, but before I even got them on, I leaned toward the window of the tent and unzipped the mesh. I could see the shape of someone standing by my car, not moving, just standing there, one hand still on the door handle. I snapped, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "Hey, get the fuck away from my car." He didn't move, just stood there and looked straight at me through the tent. Eyes locked on mine, not blinking. I couldn't make out his face clearly in the dark, but his posture, it was weird. He wasn't scared, surprised, or apologetic, just swaying a little like he was waiting for something. It was like he wanted me to come out. My heart was pounding, and every part of me was screaming to go handle it. I threw on my pants and boots, unzipped the tent, and stepped out into the cool night air. He was still there, just swaying slightly, hands hanging by his sides now, staring. I walked right up to him, keeping my distance by a few feet. I didn't yell again, didn't want to wake up half the camp, but I was ready. If he lunged, I was ready to fight. "What the fuck are you doing?" There was a pause, then a slow, slurred reply. "Trying to get in my car." "Want to sleep." His words were mushy, dragged out, like his mouth wasn't sure how to form them. That's when I really looked at him. Mid-30s maybe, skinny, long messy hair, wearing a leather vest over a shirt that looked like it had been slept in. His eyes weren't angry, they were just empty, glazed. He was piss drunk, lost, confused, probably didn't even know where he was anymore. I took a breath and tried to bring myself back down. I could feel the heat in my chest, that leftover tension from thinking something worse was about to go down. It didn't take much to imagine how bad it could have gotten if I hadn't waited a second to listen. I could have come flying out of the tent and knocked him out before he said a word. And from the looks of him, that might have seriously hurt the guy. "Your car's not here, man," I said. "Come on, let's go find it." He didn't say anything, just nodded slowly and followed me like a kid who'd gotten caught doing something wrong. We walked around for a few minutes, him stumbling behind me. I asked his name. He didn't answer. I started calling out, "Anyone know this guy?" Eventually, a guy at another campfire shouted, "Randy, that you?" I waved him over and explained what happened. Turned out the guy's name really was Randy. He'd passed out in a camp chair, woke up confused, wandered off in the dark looking for his car, and ended up at mine. His actual car was 2 rows over, barely visible behind a cluster of bikes and tents. They helped him into the passenger seat and tossed a blanket over him. I went back to my tent, sat in the chair outside for a while, trying to let the adrenaline work its way out. The stars were still out, but the party had quieted down. I looked over at my car a few times. The image of him standing there blankly staring at me stuck with me longer than I expected. Not because he was dangerous, but because for a minute, I really didn't know what was going to happen. I got a couple more hours of sleep and woke up to the smell of bacon and burnt coffee. Classic rally morning. People were up, fires rekindled. Someone was already revving an engine just to be annoying. I sat by the fire with some guys I'd met the night before, eating sausage out of a cast iron pan and trying to shake off the weirdness. Then I saw him, Randy, sober now, eyes a little bloodshot, walking slow like he wasn't sure if he was welcome anywhere. He stopped a few feet away and looked at me. "You the dude that helped me find my car last night?" I stood up. "Yeah." He looked at me for a second, like he wasn't sure what to say next. Then he nodded, looked me up and down, probably realizing how close he came to getting knocked out cold, and said, "Dude, thanks for not fucking me up last night." He handed me a 12-pack of beer. Decent stuff, too. He stuck around for a while after that, sat with us for a bit, shared a few laughs. The kind of guy you'd never expect to cause trouble when he's sober. It stuck with me, though, that whole thing. It could have gone a whole lot different. All it takes is one bad assumption, one fast move. And out there, where there's no cell signal, no security, just a bunch of half-drunk strangers around a fire, there's not a lot between a funny story and a tragedy. I was glad I waited, glad I asked, glad it ended the way it did. We stayed another night. Nothing weird happened after that. Just more beer, more stories, more riding. But I never forgot that moment. The way he stood there, not saying a word, not moving, swaying in the dark. And I never sleep at a rally now without locking my car. We were 4 hours deep into the forest when we finally found the spot. It was flat, dry, surrounded by tall pine trees with a small stream a few minutes down a slope. We were far from the trail, too far, maybe, but the point of this trip was to get away. No service, no signal, no one else. Just quiet, still trees, and the sound of water running over rocks. It was just me and Alina. We'd been dating for a year and decided on a camping trip instead of something expensive. She loved hiking, and I was just happy to go along. We set up the tent around late afternoon when the light was still good. A few birds chirped in the trees, and I remember thinking it was almost too perfect. It felt untouched. The moss on the ground was soft and dry, like it hadn't rained in a while. We pitched the tent, gathered some fallen wood for a small fire, and cooked instant noodles on a tiny portable stove. Simple stuff. After we ate, we just sat there. No phones, no traffic, nothing. Just the wind and the trees. It was calming. We didn't talk much. Just sat close, listened to the crackle of the fire, and let the day fade into dark. That night it got cold. Not freezing, but colder than we expected. We zipped our sleeping bags together inside the tent and huddled close. I remember tossing and turning a lot. The ground felt lumpier than before, and I couldn't get comfortable. Around midnight, I got up to pee, stepping out into the trees with a flashlight. I didn't see anything weird, just trees and darkness. Still, it felt too quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Heavy, like the woods were holding their breath. I shook it off and got back into the tent. Sometime early morning, before the sun came up, I woke up again. I didn't know why. No noise, no movement. Just that sudden alertness, like my body knew something before I did. I laid there listening. Alina was still sleeping next to me. Her breathing was slow. I tried to go back to sleep, but couldn't. My skin felt itchy, like something brushed against it. I scratched my forearm in the dark and felt something sting. Not badly, but like a paper cut. I waited until the light started coming in through the tent before unzipping the bag and getting up. The air was cold, and everything outside had a thin layer of dew. I stepped out and stretched. My arm stung again, so I rolled up my sleeve to look. There was a cut. Not a scratch, a clean cut, about 4 inches long, running diagonally across my inner forearm. It wasn't bleeding much, but it was red and fresh. I stared at it, confused. It looked like something sharp had sliced it, but I didn't remember anything that could have done that. No sharp branches in the tent. No knives. Nothing in my sleeping bag. I heard Alina unzip the tent behind me and come out, rubbing her eyes. She stood there, hair messy from sleep, arms wrapped around herself. Then she looked at her own arm and stopped. She had the same cut, same angle, same length, same spot, on her left arm. Neither of us said anything, but she looked at me, and I knew she was thinking the same thing. It wasn't an accident. Not both of us. Not in the exact same place. I looked inside the tent again. I checked everything. Our bags, the floor, the sleeping bags. Nothing sharp. No torn fabric. The tent flap had been zipped from the inside. Nothing made sense. There were no animal prints, no weird markings, no signs anyone had been there. It just didn't add up. I cleaned the cuts with water from the stream and wrapped both of ours with some gauze we had in the first aid kit. We didn't talk about it. I think both of us were trying not to panic. We ate some granola bars and decided to take a walk, thinking maybe we could shake off the weirdness. I brought a small knife with me this time, just in case. We wandered for about an hour, following the stream, trying to clear our heads. But the woods didn't feel the same. They felt wrong, too still. No birds this time, no rustling. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. We didn't go far. When we got back, everything at the camp looked the same. Nothing moved, nothing touched, but now there was something else. A small cut, barely visible, running across the outside of the tent wall. It hadn't been there before. It was small, thin, like someone had dragged a blade across it just enough to leave a mark, not to slice through. I ran my finger along it. It felt recent, clean. That's when it clicked. Whatever had done this hadn't come through the flap. It had come through the wall, quietly, while we were asleep. We packed everything fast. We didn't talk, we just moved, folding up the tent, stuffing it into the pack, throwing things in. I could feel eyes on me. No noise, no signs, but I could feel it. Something had been close. Too close. We left the campsite without eating. Alina kept looking over her shoulder every couple minutes. I did too. Every snap of a twig made me jump. The woods had gone from peaceful to something else, like we didn't belong anymore. About 30 minutes down the trail, I realized we'd missed our turn. The terrain was wrong. The trees were different, and the trail markers weren't where they should have been. We checked the compass, the map, everything. We were going in the right direction, but something was off. I started wondering if we'd been followed, or if someone had moved the trail markers. That idea made my skin crawl. Eventually we stopped to rest, sitting on a log while we drank some water. Alina rolled up her sleeve again. The cut looked worse now, a little swollen, like it was irritated. Mine felt the same, like it wasn't healing right. The skin around it had started to get red and warm. Not infected yet, but something was wrong. By the time we found the right path again, it was getting late. We hiked the rest of the way without stopping. No talking, just walking fast, focused, heart racing. When we finally saw the car at the trailhead, I felt like I could breathe again. We got in and left without looking back. At home, I took a real look at the cut under good light. It was thin but deep, cleaner than any scratch I'd ever gotten in the woods. Like it had been done with a razor, but had no shape to it, no reason. Just there. I looked at Alina's arm. Same thing. We never figured out what caused them. We went to a clinic a few days later. The doctor said it didn't look like a bite or a regular scratch. More like a controlled incision, he called it. Surgical, but too shallow to be anything serious. He asked how we got them, and we just said camping accident. He gave us antibiotics and said to keep it clean. That was 2 months ago. The cut's healed, but the skin where they were still feels strange. Numb sometimes. Other times it itches like something's under it. A few nights ago, I scratched too hard and opened mine again. Not deep, just enough to sting. When I wiped away the blood, I swear I saw something shiny under the skin. For a second, then it was gone. I haven't told Alina. We don't talk about the trip anymore. We haven't gone hiking since. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night with that same feeling, that something's close, even if I can't see it. I check the doors, the windows. I even check my arm, just in case. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I think about that line on the tent. The one that looked like a knife went through it, but didn't break the fabric. I keep thinking, what kind of blade could do that without making a hole? And what else did it do that night while we were asleep? It was late September when I went camping alone in northern Michigan, about an hour outside of Marquette. I'd been meaning to take the trip all summer, but work kept getting in the way. By the time I got the time off, the leaves had already started changing. I didn't mind the colder air though. It made the forest feel quieter, like it had pulled a blanket over itself and was ready to sleep. I liked that. I picked a spot off a dirt logging road that hadn't been used in years. The GPS showed it cutting into a patch of state land about 5 miles from any real road. I had to park my car just before a washout, hoist my gear onto my back, and hike in about a mile through thick woods. No cell service out there. That's what I wanted. The campsite was simple. Just a flat patch of pine needles and dry leaves under a circle of tall trees, not far from a small, slow-moving creek. I pitched my tent, got a fire going, cooked some rice and canned beans, and sat by the fire as the sun dropped. The sky turned that soft orange you only see in the woods when the trees catch the last of the light and everything else starts to turn gray. I was halfway through my dinner when I noticed something strange about the tree line across the creek. I couldn't see it clearly. It was about 30 yards away, but it fell off. The trees were still, but one section had a dark patch that wasn't there before. It looked like a person standing just inside the trees, not moving, just still, staring. At first I thought it was a shadow. I looked away for a second, then looked back, expecting it to be gone. But it wasn't. Still there, still shaped like a man. I squinted. No movement, no color, just a dark shape. I stared at it for a while, trying to decide if I was seeing what I thought I was seeing. But I didn't feel scared. I figured it had to be a tree stump or a trick of the light. My mind playing with shapes in the fading daylight. I got up and walked a few feet toward the creek, but the angle didn't help. The shape was still there. Same spot, same posture. I decided to ignore it. Night came fast, as it does in the woods. The firelight flickered on the trees, making shadows dance all around me. I zipped myself into the tent just after 9, got into my sleeping bag, and listened to the forest settle. No more birdsong, just wind and the occasional rustle of leaves. I woke up around 1 a.m. to pee. It was cold. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent slowly, trying not to make much noise. The fire had burned down to red coals. The forest was dead quiet. I stepped out, barefoot in the cold leaves, walked a little toward the creek, and relieved myself. As I turned to go back, the flashlight beam swept across the tree line and landed on something. A man, standing right at the edge of the trees, facing me. Not moving, not hiding, just standing there, maybe 15 yards from where I had pitched the tent. He wasn't wearing anything special. Dark jacket, pants, no backpack, no light, just a man standing perfectly still in the middle of the woods in the middle of the night. I froze. My heart started pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. My hand holding the flashlight began to shake. The light danced across the trees, but when I brought it back, the man was still there, still not moving. I didn't say anything, didn't make a sound. I slowly backed toward the tent. The leaves under my feet crunched louder than I wanted them to. I didn't look away from him. I kept the flashlight pointed right at him, and he didn't flinch. He didn't raise his hands or call out. He just watched me. When I reached the tent, I slid inside, zipped it shut as quietly as I could, and turned off the flashlight. Total darkness. I didn't breathe. I listened. Nothing. No movement. No footsteps. Just the faint sound of the creek. I sat there in the dark, fully clothed inside my sleeping bag, listening for any sign that he was moving. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe an hour. Maybe 2. Every muscle in my body was tight. My legs started to cramp. Still, I didn't move. Eventually, I drifted in and out of sleep. I kept jerking awake at every little noise. The snap of a twig, the rustle of wind in the leaves, even my own heartbeat. But I never heard footsteps, never heard breathing. When the sun finally started to rise, I unzipped the tent slowly and stepped out, squinting in the pale light. He was gone. I walked to the tree line where I'd seen him. No footprints. The ground was covered in pine needles, so that didn't surprise me. I checked around the creek. Nothing disturbed. No sign anyone had been there. I looked deeper into the woods, even shouted once, though it came out thin and shaky. Nothing. I packed up fast, skipped breakfast, took down the tent with shaking hands. My ears were ringing with tension. I kept scanning the trees. Every little shape between branches made me stop and stare. The hike back to the car felt 3 times longer. I kept checking behind me, heart jumping at every sound. I thought about how stupid I was, camping alone, without any way to call for help. I didn't know who that man was or what he wanted. He didn't try to approach, didn't say a word. He didn't need to. When I finally reached the car, I slammed the doors and locked them before starting the engine. I didn't relax until I was 10 miles down the road, back in town with people and signal and gas stations and noise. That was 9 months ago. I haven't gone camping since. Haven't even gone hiking. I still think about that night almost every day. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it. Maybe I was half asleep. Maybe I saw a shape and my mind filled in the rest. But I know what I saw. A man in the tree line, not walking, not hiding, not passing through. Just watching. Like he belonged there. Like he'd done it before. That's the part that stays with me the most. The stillness. He wasn't lost. He wasn't confused. He stood there like he knew exactly what he was doing. Like he'd been waiting for someone. I don't think I'll ever camp alone again. I booked the cabin because I needed to get away from everything. The stress had been piling up for months. Work, city noise, people. I was burned out, and when I saw the listing for a small wooden cabin deep in a forest with no neighbors for miles, it felt perfect. It looked clean in the pictures, modern but still rustic enough to feel like I was off-grid. The idea of being alone out there, disconnected, sounded peaceful. I arrived in the early afternoon. The drive had taken longer than I thought because the roads kept narrowing until I was driving on what felt more like a hiking trail than a proper path. By the time I pulled up to the cabin, I was second-guessing if I'd missed a turn somewhere. But the GPS still had the location marked right where I was. And there it stood, a single-story cabin surrounded by thick trees, tucked into a clearing just wide enough to let the sunlight reach the porch. I stepped out of the car and just listened. No voices. No traffic, just wind moving through the trees and the soft crackle of leaves under my boots. I unlocked the front door with the code the host had sent and stepped inside. It was nicer than I expected. Everything smelled like wood and soap. There was a small living area with a couch and a stone fireplace, a kitchenette with all the basics, a small bathroom, and a single bedroom with a large bed and clean white sheets. The windows looked out into dense forest. No curtains. I didn't think much of it then. I actually liked that. The view of nature, the feeling of openness. I unpacked slowly, set my bag in the bedroom, and made coffee just to kill time and take in the silence. That first night, I sat outside on the porch with a blanket and just stared up at the stars. They were so clear and sharp out there, no city light drowning them out. I felt my muscles loosen for the first time in weeks. I slept better that night than I had in months. It wasn't until the second day that things started feeling strange. I was lying on the bed mid-morning, just staring up at the ceiling, trying to decide whether to hike or just be lazy, when I noticed something odd on the far bedroom wall. It was tiny, something you wouldn't notice unless the light hit it just right. But it caught my eye, a small, dark circle nestled between 2 boards near the top corner of the wall. I got up squinting at it. It looked like glass. At first, I thought maybe it was some kind of sensor or a light fixture. But there was no wire, no casing, just a pinhole-sized lens sitting flush with the wood. I stood on the bed and reached up to touch it. It was cold, solid. I pressed on it slightly, and it shifted. There was a faint click. I pulled the wood apart a little more, and behind it, tucked into a shallow hole in the wall, was a small, black lens, the kind you'd find in a cheap camera. Attached to it was a tiny micro SD card. I stood there staring at it, my stomach tightening. I didn't want to overreact, but something about it made my skin crawl. I pulled the card out and climbed down from the bed. There was no computer in the cabin, but I had my laptop in the car. I brought it inside, plugged in the card using an adapter I had in my camera bag, and opened the folder. There were videos, dozens of them. Each one was labeled by date. The most recent ones were from the day before, the day I arrived. My hand froze on the mouse. I clicked on the most recent file. The screen lit up with a view of the bedroom. My bedroom. Same angle I had seen the lens from. The bed was visible in the frame, and there I was, walking into the room, unpacking my bag. It was me, from the moment I arrived. I skipped forward. There I was lying down, napping, getting up, walking around in my underwear. I clicked through several more clips, and every one of them showed me. Sleeping, dressing, sitting, even brushing my teeth. The audio was faint, but it picked up enough to hear floor creaks and soft breathing. I felt cold sweat on my back. My heart was pounding. I wanted to believe it was just a leftover setup from the owner. Maybe they forgot it was there. Maybe it was old, but the dates proved otherwise. It was still recording when I found it. And if it had been recording me, then who was watching it? I ran outside and stood in the driveway, trying to calm down. I looked around the tree line, suddenly aware of how quiet everything was. Too quiet. The trees looked different now. Not peaceful, but like a wall. Like something could be hiding just beyond them. I felt exposed standing out there. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to get in the car and just drive away right then, but I didn't know if I was overreacting. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just a security camera and the owner forgot to tell me. But why in a bedroom? Why hidden? Why still recording? I went back inside, grabbed the camera from the wall, and wrapped it in a towel. I kept the memory card. I packed my stuff slowly, constantly glancing at the windows. My skin prickled every time a branch moved or a bird flew past. Just before I left, I decided to look through the older videos on the card. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I thought it would help me understand. Maybe I thought I'd find nothing and feel better. But I found more people, different trips, men, women, couples, all of them in the same bedroom, in the same bed, filmed from the same angle. All of them unaware. The footage went back months, possibly years. One video showed a couple arguing. Another showed a man crying quietly in the dark. A few clips showed people completely still, just lying awake, staring into the night like they sensed something was wrong. But then I found one that made my blood run cold. It showed a man, maybe in his 40s, packing his bag fast, just like I had. He kept glancing at the window, like he was spooked. The next video was darker. Same man. It was filmed at night. He was sleeping, or trying to, tossing, turning. He sat up suddenly, looked directly at the camera, not by accident, but like he knew it was there. Then he stood up and walked out of frame. That was the last clip. No other footage followed. Just silence. I didn't finish the rest. I pulled the card out, stuffed it in my bag, and left the cabin. I didn't lock the door. I didn't even care if I left anything behind. I just got in the car and drove. I didn't stop until I hit a gas station an hour and a half away. I sat there for a long time with the car in park, just breathing. When I finally made it home, I reported the listing. I didn't tell them everything, just enough. I didn't want to deal with police or questions. I uploaded a copy of the files to a drive just in case, but I've never looked at them again. Sometimes I think about the man in that last clip, the way he looked at the camera, the way he vanished. I check my own apartment now, every couple weeks. I look behind vents, under furniture, inside the smoke detectors. I've never found anything, but that doesn't mean it's not there. Because someone put that camera in the wall. Someone was watching, and they still might be. The plan was simple. 3 nights in a rental cabin deep in the woods. Some quiet time away from everything. I needed the silence. Life had been loud for too long. I'd booked the place online after seeing a few decent photos and a vague description about remote privacy. I drove out there in my own car, packed with food, a few changes of clothes, my sleeping bag, and some tools just in case. I even brought a paperback novel, thinking I'd finally get around to reading something that didn't glow in the dark. The drive took nearly 5 hours, most of it through winding forest roads that thinned into gravel, and then almost nothing. I lost cell service halfway there. The directions from the owner had me take an old dirt path barely wide enough for the car. It was lined with tall pine trees that leaned in like they were watching. The trees never broke until the last moment, opening into a clearing with a small, worn-looking cabin. The place looked older than it had in the pictures. Paint peeling off the wood, a few shingles missing, one window slightly cracked. But it was dry, standing and quiet. That's what I wanted. I parked the car beside the porch and took my bag inside. The cabin had one bedroom, a small kitchen, and a bathroom that barely worked. There was no TV, no radio, no Wi-Fi. Only a wood stove, a dusty couch, and a heavy silence that felt thick in my ears. I didn't mind. That first night was uneventful. I ate a simple meal from the canned stuff I brought, sat out on the porch until the light faded completely, then headed inside to sleep. The stars were bright out here, too bright almost. The kind of brightness that reminded you how far from everything you really were. I fell asleep listening to nothing but the wind moving through trees. The next morning, I decided to hike around the area. There wasn't much to see beyond trees, more trees, and the occasional rabbit darting across the undergrowth. I walked maybe 2 miles out before turning around. I didn't want to get lost. By the time I got back, it was mid-afternoon. I sat on the porch again, writing in a notebook and sipping lukewarm coffee. I wasn't thinking about the car. The first sign that something was wrong came that night. Around 1 a.m., I thought I heard movement outside, light, deliberate steps across leaves. I froze, holding my breath, ears straining. But the sound didn't repeat. I stared out the window into blackness for a long time before finally lying back down. The cabin was old. Maybe it was just a branch or a squirrel. I told myself that over and over. The next day, I decided I'd cut the trip short by a day. I'd enjoyed the silence, but something in me felt uneasy. I didn't feel alone out here anymore. I don't know why. I started packing my stuff by the afternoon, loaded everything into the trunk, and sat in the driver's seat. I turned the key. Nothing. Not a cough. Not a struggle, just dead. I tried again. Nothing. My stomach dropped. I sat there in silence for a few seconds, then got out and popped the hood. I know enough about engines to recognize when something's clearly wrong. The battery cables were unplugged, both of them, neatly, cleanly, like someone had done it on purpose and carefully, not like something had come loose. I didn't touch them the whole time I was here. I know that for sure. I stood there with the hood up, staring at those disconnected cables, feeling my chest tighten. Someone had opened my hood. Someone had gone under it. Someone had done this while I slept. I looked around slowly. The trees pressed in from all sides. The woods were too quiet. I didn't hear birds anymore. I didn't see animals, just stillness. I put the hood back down gently and walked back to the cabin. I locked the door behind me, even though it was the kind of lock that could be kicked in with one good shove. I kept all the lights off and sat by the window, watching, waiting. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but I didn't want to be surprised. Night came slow and heavy. I kept thinking about the steps I'd heard. Had that been the moment? Was someone out there, watching, waiting for me to fall asleep? I didn't sleep that night. I stayed by the window, holding a flashlight and the tire iron I grabbed from the trunk earlier. My eyes kept scanning the trees, my ears tuned for anything. But nothing came, not even the wind this time. Just silence so loud it hurt. At dawn, I went out and reconnected the cables. My hands were shaking and I kept looking over my shoulder. I started the engine. It turned over this time. Relief hit me like a wave, but I didn't feel safe. I shoved everything into the car in a panic and left. I didn't bother checking if I forgot anything. The drive back out was the worst part. The narrow path felt tighter, like the woods had crept in while I wasn't looking. I kept checking the rear-view mirror. I didn't know what I was expecting to see. A person? A shadow? A figure standing just far enough away to disappear into the trees? But the road stayed empty. When I got back to town, the first thing I did was stop at a mechanic's place, just to be sure. I told him the car wouldn't start yesterday, but now it did, and I didn't mention the cabin. He checked it and told me there were no real issues. Battery's fine, starter's fine, everything's connected. Of course it was. I went home and didn't talk about it. Not for a while. I kept thinking I was overreacting. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe the wires were loose from the rough drive-in. But I knew deep down that wasn't true. The way the cables were disconnected, it was too precise. Like someone had waited until I was asleep, went under my hood, and then just watched. It didn't take anything. They didn't damage anything. They just made sure I couldn't leave. And then they left me alone. That's what I keep thinking about. Not the fear or the silence or the footsteps, but the fact that whoever did it could have done anything. And they didn't. They just wanted me to know they were there. I haven't gone camping since. Haven't stayed overnight anywhere without streetlights and neighbors nearby. I lock my car every time I get out, even in my driveway. I check under the hood more often than I should, because that feeling, knowing someone was close enough to touch my car while I slept, that never really leaves you. It sticks. And every now and then, when I wake up in the middle of the night and look out the window, I wonder if they follow me back. If they're still out there, waiting. Just like before, waiting for me to feel alone again. It started with an accident. I had booked an Airbnb in a small town just outside Portland for a long weekend to get away from work. I work in tech, long hours, always in front of screen, and lately I'd been feeling like my brain was starting to melt from the inside out. I needed quiet, fresh air, and no meetings for 3 days. I picked this place because it was cheap, remote, and looked clean. It wasn't a cabin or anything special, just a small guest house behind someone's home that was listed as cozy, private, and newly renovated. The reviews were positive. Seemed safe enough. I got there late Friday evening. The directions the host gave me were simple, but I still had to drive up this long, narrow gravel road through tall trees for what felt like forever before I saw the main house. It was dark already, and there weren't many lights around. The guest house was around back, like she said. It looked decent, a little one-story building with a porch light and a small deck. No one came out to greet me, which I preferred. The place inside was minimal. A small kitchenette, a couch, a coffee table, a queen bed in the corner, and a bathroom. Everything smelled clean, but like overly clean, like the scent of bleach was still lingering in the air. I thought nothing of it. I dumped my bag near the couch, plugged in my phone, and lay down for a bit. That first night was uneventful. I made some noodles I brought, watched a movie I downloaded, and went to bed early. I didn't hear anything unusual, but the silence itself was kind of unsettling. No cars, no people, not even wind. Just dead quiet. I told myself I wanted this, peace and quiet, and forced myself to enjoy it. The next morning, I woke up feeling well rested. I made coffee, went for a short walk near the property, and saw nothing out of the ordinary. The host's main house looked shut, curtains drawn, no car in the driveway. I figured she wasn't home. Fine by me. I spent most of the day inside reading and journaling, just trying to clear my head. I didn't even go into town. That night, I stayed up a little later. Around midnight, I went to brush my teeth. That's when I noticed something strange. The medicine cabinet above the sink had scratches near the bottom of the mirror, like someone had tried to pry it open. I touched the edge and realized it was loose, like the whole mirror part could come off. I gently pulled on it, and sure enough, it popped open like a hidden compartment. Behind it was a narrow gap in the wall, maybe 10 inches deep. Inside there were things. At first I thought it was junk, but I pulled them out one by one. An old disposable camera, a gold ring, a Polaroid photo, and a spiral notebook with a rubber band wrapped tightly around it. I laid them all out on the bathroom sink, staring at them. The photo was of a woman, standing in what looked like the same guest house I was in, but the walls looked different, older. She was smiling, holding a coffee mug. The ring looked like a wedding ring. The notebook was what got me most. It was packed full of entries, no dates, just lines and lines of someone's handwriting. The pages were stiff, like they had been exposed to moisture at some point. I shouldn't have read it, I know that, but I did. The entries started out normal, like a diary. A woman talking about how she booked the Airbnb to get away from her husband, how she wanted to clear her mind. Then things started to shift. She mentioned hearing footsteps outside the guest house at night. She wrote about waking up and finding the front door unlocked. She thought someone was coming in while she slept. The last few pages were frantic, the handwriting messy and slanted. She said someone had taken her phone, that she wasn't sure if she was being drugged. Then nothing, just blank pages after that. I stood there for a long time, not knowing what to do. I felt a tight knot in my stomach, like I had just read something I was never meant to find. I packed the items back into the compartment and shut it. I couldn't sleep that night. I left the light on and sat on the couch, staring at the door. Around 3 a.m., I heard something. It was the soft creak of what outside. I froze. It was faint but unmistakable. I stood up slowly and moved toward the window, gently pulling the curtain back just an inch. Nothing, just trees and shadows. But I didn't feel safe anymore. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I convinced myself it was just nerves that I had let the notebook get into my head. I packed my things and decided to cut the trip short. As I was leaving, I glanced back at the guest house and something clicked. The porch light wasn't on. I remembered turning it on the first night. I always left lights on when I traveled, but now it was off, and I knew I didn't turn it off. My hand started to shake on the steering wheel as I backed out and drove away down that gravel road, heart racing the entire way. Back home, I tried to forget about it, but 2 weeks later, I couldn't resist checking the Airbnb listing again. The guest house was gone, completely removed, not even in the unavailable section. I tried to find the host's name, nothing. I checked my email for the confirmation. It was gone, no trace of the receipt. I still had the text instructions she sent me though, and the address. I Googled it. The property came up, but it was listed as abandoned. A real estate website said it had been on the market for 3 years with no buyers. The house and guest house were supposedly empty. I triple-checked the photos. It was the same place. I didn't know what to make of it. I called the local county office and pretended to be a potential buyer, just to get more info. The woman I spoke to told me that the property had been in probate after the owner passed away a few years ago. No one had been living there. No one was renting it out. She said I must have the wrong address. I didn't. I knew I didn't. A week later, a package showed up at my door. No return address. Inside was the spiral notebook, the one I had found. I never told anyone about it, not even my friends. But there it was, sitting in my hands again. I opened it, and now there were new pages. Not many, just a few. The handwriting was mine. I don't remember writing them. They were just short paragraphs, fragments, saying things like, "Don't trust the reviews," and "It looks different during the day." And one line repeated 3 times, "You were supposed to forget." I threw it out. I don't care how crazy it sounds. I burned it in a steel bucket in my backyard and poured water over the ashes. Then I deleted every Airbnb email I had, changed my passwords, and canceled 2 upcoming trips. I didn't want to go anywhere alone anymore. It's been almost 6 months since that weekend. I haven't heard anything else, haven't gotten any more strange packages. I sleep fine now mostly, but sometimes when I brush my teeth, I find myself staring at the medicine cabinet, just staring at it like I'm waiting for it to open. I haven't booked an Airbnb since. It was mid-October when we got to that campground. I remember the sky was clear that day, a pale blue with that dry, kind of light you only get in fall. The air smelled sharp, like pine needles and cold dirt. There were 4 of us, me, Drew, Josh, and Kevin. We were all in our early 30s, and we planned this weekend trip weeks ago. Just 2 nights out in the woods, nothing complicated. We brought what we needed, tents, food, extra layers, a few beers, but mostly we were just excited to get away from everything. The drive there had taken longer than it should have. We got turned around twice after we lost signal and missed a turn somewhere. By the time we pulled into the campground's gravel lot, it was just after 4 p.m. The place was empty. No other cars, no sound but the trees swaying and some crows calling now and then. The campsite was public, but in a remote area of the state park, and it wasn't exactly tourist season. That part didn't bother me. I like it quiet. I like not seeing strangers for a few days. There was a small wooden booth near the lot, with a faded map nailed to one side and a green metal box bolted to the other. It had a slot for fees and a weathered notebook inside, just a regular guest log where campers write down their names and the date they arrived. The idea is you pay cash into the box, write down your name and campsite number, and go set up. We didn't think much of it. Drew pulled a notebook out and flipped it open while I fished a 20 from my wallet. He stopped on a page, stared for a second, then showed it to me. My full name was written there. Not just mine, all 4 of us. Our names were already filled out. Neat handwriting, black pen. The date column had today's date, and next to it someone had written Site 7. None of us had written it. I hadn't even told anyone else we were coming to Site 7. We hadn't picked a number ahead of time. It was just a random choice when we pulled up and saw the open lots. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe someone else with the same names, or maybe a ranger had filled it out for some reason. But the names were exact. Full names. Middle initials, too. No one ever writes middle initials unless they're filling out something formal. It felt too precise. Josh laughed it off, said it was weird but probably some glitch or joke. We all sort of shrugged it off. Nobody wanted to be the one to act freaked out about a notebook. We stuffed the 20 in a box, grabbed the gear from the trunk, and started the short walk to Site 7. The trail led a few hundred feet into the trees and opened into a wide clearing with a fire ring, a wooden picnic table, and a soft patch of dirt for tents. It looked just like every other campsite I'd been to. Peaceful. Still, we got set up fast. Drew and I pitched one tent, Kevin and Josh shared the other. The sun dipped lower, and the shadows stretched out long between the trees. We gathered kindling, got a small fire going, and cracked a couple of beers. For a while, it was normal. The kind of night you look forward to: quiet, easy, smoke in the air, the sound of wood crackling. But the guest log stayed in my mind. I couldn't let it go. Around 8, I walked back to the lot with my headlamp, saying I had to grab something from the car. I took the notebook from the box again, flipped through every page before and after hours. Nothing else stood out, just other people's names, scattered dates. But our page was different. Something about how the names looked. It was too clean, like it wasn't written standing at that post. The handwriting didn't have that rushed look everyone gets when writing outside in the cold. It was straight, tight even. I stared at it longer than I should have. My gut started tightening in that slow, creeping way that doesn't go away. I thought about tearing the page out, but that felt stupid. Like I'd be giving it power, somehow. Instead, I left it, walked back to camp, and didn't say anything. The night got colder fast. By 10, we were all zipped in our sleeping bags. The fire was down to embers. I lay there, not tired at all, just staring at the dark tent ceiling, listening. I could hear someone else shifting in their sleeping bag beside me, probably Drew. Outside, the wind had died down. It was too quiet. At some point, I started hearing crunching. Not loud, just soft steps, slow and irregular. Leaves, maybe sticks breaking. It wasn't an animal. It didn't move like one. It would stop for a while, then pick up again. Circling. I held my breath for a while, tried to listen harder, but then it stopped. I told myself it was probably one of the guys getting up to take a leak. But I never heard the tent unzip. I never heard it zip back either. In the morning, everything looked normal. Nothing seemed touched, no tracks around camp. Everyone was fine, but Drew said something weird. He said he woke up in the middle of the night because he thought someone was standing between the tents. Just standing, not moving. He didn't look, he didn't even open his eyes all the way. But he swore he felt it, like how you can feel when someone's staring at you. We didn't talk about it much. Just made breakfast, packed up a few things, and planned to hike the trails around the ridge before lunch. We left most of our gear at the site and headed out. The trail was narrow but easy to follow, with old red markers nailed to the trees. After about 2 hours, we looped back near the camp. That's when we saw it. There was another notebook, not the guest log from the parking lot. This one was sitting on the ground near our fire pit, half under a rock. It was smaller, spiral-bound. The cover was plain, but it looked like someone had been carrying it around. It was dirt-smudged, edges bent. I picked it up and flipped it open. It was filled with notes. Not just one kind of note, more like observations. Pages and pages of them. Descriptions of us. Our clothes, what we ate, who got up when, what time we slept. Written in third person, as if someone had been watching us. It mentioned Kevin's red flannel, Josh's limp from his old knee injury, the exact time Drew lit the fire. My name appeared the most. It said I was the one who notices too much. That phrase was underlined. I didn't say anything for a long time. I passed it to Josh, then the others. No one said anything for a while. We just stood there, flipping through the pages. The entries went back 2 days before we arrived. We packed everything up immediately. No food, no trash left behind. We didn't talk much while we took the tents down. Kevin kept looking over his shoulder every few minutes. I kept checking the tree lean, waiting to see someone step out, but no one did. The walk back to the car felt longer than it should have. When we got to the gravel lot, another truck was parked next to ours. Old, gray, rusted. No one was inside. The hood was cold. The passenger side window was rolled down a few inches. Inside the truck was a duffel bag and a camera with a long lens on the seat. I looked around. The lot was empty. The woods were quiet again. I opened our car, tossed the bags in, and got in fast. So did the others. Nobody said we were scared, but I could feel it like a weight in the air. As we backed out of the lot, I glanced at the booth one last time. The notebook was still there, the page with our names still sitting on top. I looked away and didn't turn back. We didn't report it. I don't know why. Maybe none of us wanted to answer the questions. Maybe it just felt better to leave it behind, like it wouldn't follow us if we didn't give it shape. But I think about that notebook a lot. Not just the one by the log post, but the other one. The one full of notes that someone had written while hiding in the woods, watching us. I still have it. I don't know why I took it. I keep it in a drawer in my garage, inside a Ziploc bag. I haven't opened it again. I don't want to know what the last page says. Not yet. I rented a small, off-grid cabin deep in the woods of northern Minnesota. It was mid-September. The weather was just starting to turn cold at night, but the days were still nice and quiet. I've been planning the trip for weeks. 3 days alone, just me, my camera, and no noise except the wind and maybe some loons calling in the distance. I brought food, firewood, and a big thermos of coffee. No phone service, no internet, just total silence. That's what I wanted. I bought a motion-activated trail camera a couple weeks before the trip. It was a good one, night vision, high resolution, decent battery life. I figure I might catch some shots of deer, maybe a fox, or even a bear if I was lucky. The plan was to mount it to a tree just outside the cabin, pointed toward the edge of the clearing. The tree started thick just 20 or 30 feet from the back porch, so I aimed it at the natural opening where I figured animals might come through. I got to the cabin in the early afternoon and spent the first couple hours unloading my stuff and setting things up. The cabin was old but well built. Just one room and a small loft above for sleeping. A big wood stove in the corner, a heavy table made from pine slabs, 2 chairs, and shelves stocked with basics. It smelled like cedar and smoke. No electricity, just some lanterns and candles. After I was done unpacking, I walked out back and strapped the trail cam to a tree. It clicked into place, blinking red for a second to let me know it was armed. I tested it by walking back and forth a couple times, and it caught me just fine. Then I left it alone. I cooked some soup on the stove, sat on the porch with a beer, and listened to the woods settle down. I didn't hear much. No traffic, no voices. Just wind in the trees and the occasional crack of a twig somewhere out there in the forest. At some point, I went inside, locked the door, and turned in for the night. That first night was uneventful. I woke up a few times to silence. Not even crickets. It was the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. In the morning, I got up, made coffee on the stove, and sat at the table flipping through a paperback. After a couple hours, I remembered the trail cam and decided to check what it had caught overnight. I took it down and brought it inside. It had a small screen on the back for reviewing clips. I scrolled past the test videos I made earlier, me walking around adjusting the angle. Then there was a clip from around 11:17 p.m. The footage was black and white. The trees looked like bones in the night vision. At first, nothing moved. I figured maybe it had triggered from the wind or a branch falling. But then on the right side of the frame, near the edge of the trees, something shifted. A shape. A person. He wasn't walking. He was just standing there. At first I thought maybe it was some optical illusion, a shadow that looked like a person. But the shape was too clear. Shoulders, arms, a head. And he was facing the cabin. The man didn't move. Not for the full 20 seconds of the clip. He just stood perfectly still, maybe 30 feet from the back porch, half hidden by trees. I kept watching the clip over and over, my stomach turning tighter each time. It wasn't a mistake. It was a man. No animal moves like that. He had both arms down at his sides, his posture stiff, his feet planted. I scrolled to the next clip. It was about 6 minutes later. Same angle, same trees. This time, the man was gone. The next video was around 2:30 a.m. It was triggered again, but nothing showed up in the frame. Just more empty woods and shadows. Maybe an animal had passed just outside the camera's view. I stood there for a while, holding the camera, listening. I didn't hear anything unusual, but the quiet felt different now. Like I was being watched. I stepped out onto the porch and looked toward the trees. Nothing, just thick forest, the sunlight coming through the branches. But I knew now that someone had been out there. Not some lost hiker either. Who stands in the woods in the middle of the night, watching a cabin, not moving? It didn't make any sense. I walked slowly to the spot where the man had been. The ground was soft and covered in dead leaves and pine needles. I looked for prints, anything disturbed. I thought I saw something like a heel mark, but it was hard to be sure. No clear tracks. I circled the area for a while, looking deeper into the trees, half expecting to see someone standing just out of sight. But there was no one. After 20 minutes, I went back inside and locked the door again. The rest of the day, I kept checking over my shoulder. I didn't hike like I planned. I didn't even take more pictures. I stayed close to the cabin, staying alert. The woods didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like they were holding something just out of sight, and I didn't like that feeling. That night, I debated packing up and leaving, but the nearest town was 2 hours away down a winding gravel road. It would take almost an hour just to reach the main road, and I didn't like the idea of driving that far in the dark, especially in the middle of nowhere. I figured I'd stay one more night. I kept my flashlight and a heavy hatchet near the bed. I barely slept. Every little sound outside made me sit up. I kept looking at the back windows, expecting to see a figure standing there in the dark. But nothing happened. No footsteps, no knocking, no sounds at all except the wind and a few branches creaking. In the morning, I checked the trail cam again. There were only 2 clips during the night. Both triggered around 1:40 a.m. The first was completely empty. The second showed the same spot, nothing in the frame at first, and then, barely visible, something moved behind a tree on the far left. It was quick, just a shadow, shifting slightly, like someone stepping behind a trunk. Then the clip ended. That was enough. I packed everything within the hour. I didn't even eat breakfast. I threw all my gear into the car and made sure the door was locked behind me, even though I wasn't coming back. The forest was dead quiet again, but it didn't feel peaceful. It felt like someone was still out there, watching me leave. The drive out was long and slow. Every time the road curved or narrowed, I found myself checking the rearview mirror. I kept expecting to see someone standing in the middle of the road behind me, but there was no one. Just the woods, mile after mile of trees, thick and silent. Back home, I uploaded the footage to my laptop to see it better on a bigger screen. The man was real. The frame showed his face clearer than I remembered. He wasn't wearing any kind of outdoor gear, just a light jacket and pants. No backpack, no flashlight, just standing there in the dark, staring at the cabin. His face didn't show any expression, just blank, like he was waiting for something. I didn't report it. What would I even say? I wasn't hurt. Nothing was stolen. And I didn't have a name or even a license plate. Just grainy night footage of a man standing still in the woods. But I haven't gone back to that cabin. I canceled the rest of the weekends I had booked there. I haven't even gone camping since. I still go hiking sometimes, but I stay close to town now, and I don't camp alone anymore. The trail cam is packed away in a box in the garage. I haven't used it again. It's not that I think the man followed me. I don't. But knowing he was there just watching, not doing anything, not saying anything, not even trying to hide, that's what gets to me. People don't act like that unless something is wrong. Something was off about him. Deeply off. And I still wonder what would have happened if I'd stepped out onto the porch that night, or if I hadn't locked the door. I try not to think about it too much, but sometimes I catch myself watching the woods behind my house longer than I should. Just making sure no one's standing there. It was supposed to be a short solo trip, just me in the woods for a weekend. I've been planning it for a while, wanted to get away from people, away from work, from everything. I found a spot online, a lesser-known area up north, not too far from a stretch of old forest trails. The topo map I downloaded showed a cabin deep in the woods. No name, no photos, but clearly marked. A little square symbol right next to a thin, winding trail. That's what caught my eye. It felt perfect, like one of those hidden spots no one really uses anymore. I drove out on a Friday afternoon. The last gas station I passed was 25 miles before the trailhead. The guy inside told me the forest used to have a lot more traffic, but now it was mostly locals who knew their way around. He said something about hunters going missing back in the 90s, but it sounded like one of those stories old-timers like to tell. I brushed it off. I had my GPS, a compass, printed maps, gear, plenty of food and water. I'd be fine. I parked my car just off the main road and locked everything up. Threw on my pack and headed into the woods. It was quiet, not totally silent, but no cars, no planes overhead. Just wind in the trees, the crunch of boots on dry leaves. I walked for about 2 hours along a fading trail. At first it was easy to follow, light boot tracks, broken branches, old marker ribbons tied to tree trunks. But after a while it got harder. The ribbon stopped. The trail narrowed and split more than once. I had to stop and check the map several times to keep heading in the right direction. The sun dipped lower and the air got cooler. I knew I had maybe an hour of light left. The cabin, according to my map, should have been about half a mile ahead. I picked up my pace. I started scanning through the trees, expecting to catch a glimpse of roof or wall. Nothing, just more trees, thick and tangled. I kept going, checking my GPS every 5 minutes. It still showed me heading straight toward the cabin's location. When I got to the spot, I stopped. My GPS said I was standing right on top of it. I checked the map again. Same thing. My compass lined up, but there was nothing there. No structure, no clearing, no signs of anything ever being built. Just trees, moss, underbrush. I thought maybe I was off by a few hundred feet. I searched in circles, expanding out each time. 15 minutes, then 30. Still nothing. It made no sense. I was tired, hungry, and the light was dying. I didn't want to sleep right on top of that spot. It felt off. I moved about 200 feet downhill, found a relatively flat patch near a rock outcrop, and set up my tent. I ate a cold dinner, just a couple energy bars and jerky. I didn't feel like lighting a fire. It was too quiet around me, and I didn't want to draw attention. Not that I thought anyone was out there, but the feeling in my stomach said otherwise. Like something was off kilter, but I couldn't name it. I lay awake in the tent for a long time. I couldn't hear anything outside. Not wind, not bugs, not even birds. Just dead stillness. Even when it got fully dark, that silence stayed. It's hard to explain how unnatural that feels until you experience it. Your ears reach for sound and come back empty over and over. It starts to mess with you. Makes you feel like something is listening to you instead. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. But around 2 a.m., I woke up sweating, heart pounding. I didn't know why. No sound, no movement, just this tightness in my chest. I reached for my flashlight, but stopped myself. I stayed completely still and just listened. I thought I heard something shift outside, like weight on leaves. Just once, then nothing. I stayed awake until dawn. When light started breaking through the trees, I got out, packed everything quickly. I didn't care about breakfast. I just wanted to go. The plan had been to spend 2 nights and hike back Sunday, but I didn't want to stay another hour out there. But when I started following the GPS trail back, something felt wrong. The landscape didn't match what I remembered. The trees looked the same, sure, pines and thick brush, but I didn't pass the same landmarks. I didn't see the split in the trail I came through. No fallen log I'd stepped over. No old ribbon markers. I thought I just veered off and needed to adjust, so I tried to correct east, but that only pushed me deeper into thicker woods. The GPS started lagging. It would freeze for minutes, then suddenly jump my position back the way I came. I checked my compass. Still working. I followed it west, hoping to hit the edge of the forest or a known point on the map. I walked for over an hour and still saw nothing familiar. No roads, no trail, no cabin, just more forest. Then I found the same rock outcrop I had camped beside. Same bent tree near it. Same patch of moss. My footprints were still there. I'd gone in a full circle. That didn't make sense. I hadn't turned at all. I sat down, breathing hard. I wasn't panicking yet, but I was getting close. I pulled out the map again and scanned it. That little square symbol, the cabin, was right there. Clear as day. I hadn't imagined it, but there was no cabin. Nothing man-made anywhere. And no matter which direction I took, I somehow kept coming back to that same stretch of woods. The only thing I hadn't done yet was climb. The hill north of the rock outcrop was steep and covered in loose soil, but I figured it might give me a better view of the terrain. I hiked up slow, using roots for balance. At the top, I stood and looked around. All I could see were endless trees. No buildings, no roads, no smoke, nothing. It was like I was in a part of the forest that didn't exist on any real map. But then I saw something. Down below, maybe 200 yards east, a square shape in the trees. Low to the ground. Not a cabin, but more like an old foundation. I made my way toward it carefully. When I got close, I saw that it was the remains of a stone structure. Just a bottom layer of walls, maybe 2 feet high. The rest had collapsed or rotted away. There were old metal scraps in the dirt. A rusted hinge. Nails. Maybe an old stove plate. It had been a cabin once, but it had been gone a long time. Years, maybe decades. That explained the mark on the map. It hadn't been updated, but what didn't make sense was how completely erased it felt. No trail to it, no clearing around it. Trees had grown right into the walls. It felt swallowed by the forest. I searched the site anyway. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe, or desperation. I found a small pit nearby, half covered in leaves and roots. Looked like it had been used as a trash hole or maybe a fire pit. Inside were old bones. Animal, probably. I told myself that, but they didn't look burned. Just left there. Scattered. I didn't stay long after that. I tried a new route heading northwest, using the sun instead of GPS. I followed a stream for a while, hoping it would lead me out. Eventually it did. After hours of walking, I hit a dirt road. I followed it another mile until I reached my car. When I got home, I went online and tried to find more info about that cabin. I couldn't find anything, not even old logging records. I asked on a couple camping forums. Nobody had heard of a cabin in that part of the forest. One guy messaged me saying the maps in that area were based on 1960 survey data and hadn't been properly updated since. Sometimes symbols were left in by mistake. I still have the map. Still has the little square on it. I haven't gone back. I haven't camped alone since. I don't know what it was, just an old ruin swallowed by time, or something else. But that forest didn't feel empty. It felt like it had buried something, like it didn't want anyone to find it again. It was cold in the cabin, that kind of cold that seeps through the walls and settles in your bones no matter how many layers you wear. We'd arrived the day before, me, 2 friends, and a vague plan to spend the weekend in the mountains, away from work, away from noise. The place wasn't fancy, just an old rental tucked into a hill, wood creaking under every step, wind slipping through the cracks in the windows like thin fingers. The owner had told us the place had firewood stocked downstairs. Downstairs being the basement. None of us had gone yet. We'd been too busy drinking, unpacking, try to settle in. But now, with the temperature dropping and the small electric heater barely making a difference, I decided to go down and get some firewood. The door to the basement was in the kitchen, behind an old metal rack with dented pots hanging from it. I moved it aside and opened the door. The smell hit first, damp wood, old dust, and something else. Something a little sour. The light switch was right next to the door, but when I flipped it, nothing happened. Just a click and more darkness. I sighed, grabbed my flashlight from the counter, and stepped down into the pitch black. The steps groaned beneath me, loud in the silence. I kept my hand on the wall as I went, sweeping the light in front of me slowly. The basement was unfinished. Dirt floor in some spots, cracked concrete in others, exposed wooden beams overhead, some of them bowed and darkened with age. I could see the stacked firewood near the far wall, piled almost to the ceiling. That should have been all I needed. Just grab an armful and head back up. But the beam of my flashlight caught something off to the left. Something that didn't match the rest of the clutter. Not wood or tools or junk. It was a wall built into the corner of the basement, made of poured concrete. While the rest of the foundation had rough surfaces and water stains, this part was clean. Too clean. The wall was smoother, newer looking. The air felt heavier over there, like it was a separate part of the basement entirely. And at the base of that wall, I saw something bolted to the concrete. Chains. Thick, rusted metal chains, hanging from large iron rings drilled straight into the wall. There were 4 of them. Too low, too high, like they'd been placed for someone's wrists and ankles. And right there in the middle of the floor, beneath the chains, I saw deep scratch marks, long gouges cut into the concrete. Not by tools, not clean, jagged, uneven, and recent. They hadn't filled with dust yet. Some of the edges were still light gray, like fresh damage. I just stood there, staring. It didn't make sense. Chains in a basement, in a rental cabin? Why would those even be there? And why would anyone scratch the floor like that? Unless they were trying to get away. I stepped closer before I even realized it, moving slowly, my flashlight locked on the wall. The air smelled worse the closer I got. Metallic, like old blood. I didn't want to believe it, but that's what it smelled like. I crouched near the scratch marks and ran my hand over them. They were deep enough to catch my fingertip. I looked at the base of the wall again and noticed something tucked behind one of the chains. It looked like a piece of cloth wedged into a crack. I reached out and pulled it free. It was part of a shirt, torn, dirty, stiff, stained dark in places. I turned it over and saw what looked like a faded logo. A brand I recognized. One of those popular hiking shirts. Not old, either. The kind people wear nowadays. I dropped it. My mind was racing. This wasn't just some leftover hardware from 100 years ago. This was recent. Someone had been down here. Someone had been kept down here. The chains, the shirt, the scratches, it all added up to something ugly, something I didn't want to think about. But I couldn't look away. I got up fast and backed away, shining the light around the rest of the basement. There was a workbench to the right with tools hanging above it. Most were dusty and unused, but one or two had been wiped clean recently. A pair of bolt cutters, a large hammer, some rope. Everything looked too organized, like someone had been using it regularly. My stomach turned. I wanted to leave, get upstairs, get out. I turned to go, but something on the far wall caught my light again. It was a hook, just a big metal hook, but there was a padlock hanging from it, and next to it was a clipboard nailed to the wall. I hesitated, then went over and looked at it. There was a paper on it, water-stained but still readable. It had dates, just dates and times. No names, no notes, just lines like June 3rd, 11:40 p.m. Stern, 6-4, 2, 15 am Stern. Stern, 6-4, 5, 00 am Stern. And on, dozens of them, every couple of hours, all through the night. The last one, Stern, 6-18, 4, 20 am Stern. That was only 4 days ago. I stood there frozen. I remembered the smell, that metal scent that didn't come from old tools. The fact the scratches weren't covered in dust. The clean tools, the torn shirt. Someone had been here, maybe even just this past week. I felt like I had walked straight into something I shouldn't have seen. I didn't want to know more. I ran back to the stairs, taking them two at a time, not even turning off my flashlight. I slammed the basement door shut and pushed the metal rack back in front of it like that would do anything. My heart was racing. I couldn't think straight. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the door, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. The others were outside, still stacking firewood and setting up chairs near the fire pit. They had no idea. I wanted to tell them. I really did. But what would I say? That I found chains in the basement? That there were scratch marks and torn clothes? I didn't want to be the paranoid one. I didn't want to ruin the weekend. But something in me kept saying it was more than just weird. It was dangerous. That night, I didn't sleep. I locked the door to the room I was staying in. I pushed a dresser in front of it too. My mind kept going back to those scratch marks, trying to imagine who or what had made them and why. The next morning, I made up an excuse to leave. Said I had work stuff, an emergency. I packed fast. When I left, I looked back at the cabin from the road and felt a wave of guilt. Not for leaving early, but for not saying anything. For not calling the cops. For not warning the next people who would rent the place. It took me 2 days before I finally did something. I called the local sheriff's office, gave him the address, said I found something that didn't feel right in the basement. I didn't give my name. I didn't want to be involved, but I knew I had to say something. It was eating me alive. I never heard back, never saw anything in the news. I checked the rental site again a week later. The cabin was still listed, still had good reviews. No mention of anything strange. Either no one checked or someone didn't want it to be found. But I still think about it. About those chains in the concrete wall. About the person who had scratched at the floor until their nails broke. About the shirt, the blood, the silence. About how someone had been kept down there not that long ago. And about how easy it was to walk away. It was the middle of July when we made the climb. Me and two buddies just chasing that strange mix of silence and adrenaline you only find in places people don't usually go. The trail up had been brutal, barely even a trail after a while. There were no markers, no other hikers, nothing but endless gray rock and small patches of stubborn mountain grass. We were high up, higher than I'd ever camped before. Our legs burned all day, and the air got thinner with every step, but we had one thing pushing us, that glacier. That giant wall of blue ice sitting at the top of the ridge, like a frozen ocean frozen in mid-crash. When we reached it, it didn't even feel real. The thing was massive, stretching like a frozen cliff along the backside of the mountain bowl we'd come up through. The air was quiet, dead quiet, like the mountain was holding its breath. We set up camp a few hundred feet from it, just far enough away that we could still feel the cold air bleeding off it, but not close enough to get hit with any sudden wind bursts. It was strange how much colder it felt just being near it, like standing in front of a freezer with the door wide open. We brought a basic 3-person tent, compact and easy to carry, and we used the surrounding rocks to build a small half wall around it to block some of the air. It wasn't much, maybe 2 feet high, but it made a difference. We cooked near the edge of our little wall, the stove flame flickering in the wind, even with a windscreen around it. It was quiet, almost too quiet. I remember how the only real sound came from the occasional creaking or cracking from the glacier itself. The sound would echo strangely through the bowl, low and deep, like the mountain shifting in its sleep. That evening, we sat on our foam pads and watched a pair of mountaineers start their climb up the glacier. Tiny figures against the towering blue wall, tied together with a rope and moving in small, careful steps. It looked slow, cold, and dangerous, but beautiful. The kind of thing you know you'll never do, but feel lucky just to witness. As the sun set, the glacier glowed faintly blue. It was the kind of view that burned into your memory, the kind you think about when you're stuck behind a desk or lying in bed unable to sleep. We slept hard that night, wrapped tight in our bags, the cold creeping in despite all our layers. The wind stayed low, and aside from a few distant pops from the ice, it was a still night. Morning came with bright sun, clear skies, and the sound of runoff. Meltwater trickling down into little temporary streams all around us. You could hear it beneath the rocks, beneath the ice. It sounded alive. After a quick breakfast of granola bars and whatever was left of our instant coffee, we packed a small day bag and headed off to check out a waterfall we'd seen from the ridge on our way up. It wasn't marked on any map we had, just a silver line in the distance that we figured was worth checking out. The walk wasn't far, maybe an hour or so over uneven rock and across some light snow patches that hadn't melted yet. The air was crisp and dry, and the sun made it feel warmer than it really was. The waterfall was better than we'd hoped, pouring out of the side of the cliff and splashing down into a series of bright, cold pools. It looked untouched, clean, untouched by humans. We sat there for a while, shoes off, soaking our feet and letting the cold water numb the aches. We took a few photos, just the kind you take without thinking too much about, assuming they'll never do the place justice anyway. We stayed out there for a few hours, lost in that strange high-altitude calm. No reception, no noises beyond what nature decided to give us, and nothing in the world to worry about. When we headed back, the sun had shifted westward and shadows had started stretching across the rocks. It felt a little cooler, but nothing alarming. We talked about heating up some soup, maybe staying another night before heading back down. We hadn't seen a single soul besides the 2 climbers since we got up there. But when we crested the last rise back into our camp bowl, something was wrong. Off. The rocks looked out of place, scattered. Our tent wasn't there. At first, it didn't register. We just stood there, staring down, trying to make sense of it. Then it hit. Our tent was gone. Not collapsed. Not dragged by the wind. Gone. In its place was a mess of rocks, torn fabric, and what looked like a mini landslide. Huge chunks of ice sat where our tent had been, surrounded by smaller bits of broken glacier and sharp, angular stones. One of our foam pads was shredded and half buried under gravel. Our stove, that heavy steel stove, was bent and partially buried. One of our backpacks was wedged in between two boulders like a toy. We didn't speak. We just stood there and stared. It didn't take long to figure out what happened. A piece of the glacier, a massive one, probably the size of a small car or bigger, had broken off and tumbled down. It must have hit loose rock and triggered a mini slide, dragging everything in its path. Our tent was right in the way. Everything we had was there, or what was left of it. Our sleeping bags were torn open, covered in dirt and ice. Our food bag had been flattened completely. One of the tent poles had pierced straight into the ground like a spear. We walked around, slowly, checking the damage. I remember my hands were shaking. Not from the cold, not entirely. Just the realization that if we hadn't gone to see that waterfall, if we'd stayed to rest or nap or even been running a bit behind, we would have been right there when it hit. No question. It wasn't just rocks. That ice had weight and speed and force. It wouldn't have been a question of injuries. It would have been instant. We'd be buried under 30 tons of ice and stone, and no one would have known for days. Maybe weeks. No one knew we were up here. We didn't have time to panic. We had to act. We dug out what we could, salvaged one pack with the emergency radio and enough supplies to hike back down. The other gear was either crushed or buried. We didn't even try to sleep there again. We made a decision in less than 5 minutes. Grab what you can and move. Get down. Now. The descent was brutal. We had to move fast, but careful, with tired legs and heavy minds. Every sound from the glacier behind us made us flinch. Every gust of wind felt like another warning. We camped far lower that night, in a sheltered forest clearing, barely able to eat or talk. I remember lying awake, not from fear anymore, but from realization. That thin, sharp line between being alive and not. We had crossed it without even knowing. We made it out the next day, limping and dirty but whole. When we reached the base trailhead, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. I still think about that day, about how close it was. People talk about near-death experiences like dramatic movie scenes, but this wasn't like that. It was quiet, cold, slow. It didn't even look dangerous until after it had already passed. Nature doesn't warn you. It just happens. We never went back to that glacier. I don't think we ever will. I booked an Airbnb in a small mountain town in West Virginia because it was the only place I could find that fit my budget and had good reviews. I'd been laid off 2 months earlier and needed to get away for a while. I thought maybe a quiet place would help me get my head straight. The town was called Cold Pines, population just under 500. I'd never heard of it before. When I looked it up, the search results were sparse. Some pictures of woods and an old general store, but the house looked clean and cozy in the photos. Simple 2-story place, wood paneling, a gravel driveway, and surrounded by trees. I booked it for 2 weeks. The drive-in was already off. My GPS cut out about 10 miles before I got there, and I had to rely on vague screenshots of directions. I passed only 2 other cars on the way in. The trees got thicker, like they were leaning over the road, and the last stretch was just gravel. The town center was tiny, a single road, a gas station, and a diner with a flickering neon open sign that buzzed even through my closed window. When I pulled up to the house, it looked more worn than the photos. The paint was faded, and the porch steps had a soft give under my weight. Still, it was clean inside, smelled like lemon cleaner and old wood. There was a binder on the kitchen counter labeled House Info with Wi-Fi details and emergency numbers, but there was no signal. I figured it was just the area. The first few days were normal. I slept in, drank instant coffee on the porch, and walked into town once or twice. The town was weird though. People didn't really talk. When I walked past someone, they either looked away or stared too long. No one greeted me. I went into the diner once and felt like I'd walked into a private conversation that had just stopped. The waitress didn't smile. I ordered eggs and toast. They were cold when they came. The Airbnb didn't have a TV, which I knew going in, so I mostly read. But at night, the woods around the house got loud. Not like coyotes or bugs. It sounded like someone moving through them. On the 3rd night, around midnight, I heard what I thought were footsteps on gravel. I was upstairs reading. I froze and listened. Slow, deliberate steps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. They stopped near the side of the house. I turned off the light and waited. After a minute or two, I peeked out the upstairs window. Nothing, just black trees and a patch of the driveway lit up by the porch light. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but the sound had been too steady, too paced. The next morning, I checked the gravel, and there were marks. Could have been boot prints, could have been nothing. I didn't have a nerve to ask anyone in town about it. That night, I locked all the windows and double-checked the doors. Around 2 a.m., I heard something again. This time it was a thud, like something heavy hitting the back of the house. I sat up in bed, heart going crazy, and listened. Another thud, then silence. I didn't sleep until the sun came up. When I went outside later, there were scratches on the back wall. Deep, long ones, like someone had dragged a stick or a knife along the wood. I should have left, but I didn't. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. I even tried to laugh it off. Told myself it was probably just some local kids messing with me. But things kept happening. I leave a light on in the kitchen and find it off in the morning. One day, I came back from a walk and the front door was open just slightly. I knew I'd locked it. The next night, something tapped on the upstairs window around 3 a.m. Just 2 quick taps, like fingernails. I didn't move, didn't even breathe. Just stayed under the covers with my eyes wide open until morning. By the end of the first week, I started keeping a knife on the nightstand. I tried to leave then. I packed my bag and drove back down the gravel road. When I got to the town's only gas station, I pulled over to top off the tank. The pump didn't work. I went inside, but no one was there. The lights were on, the door was unlocked, but the place was empty. I walked through the whole store. It felt wrong. I didn't take anything, just left. I kept driving. I should have reached the main road in 15 minutes, but I didn't. I drove for 30, then 40. Nothing but trees and gravel. Eventually, I circled back to the town. I knew I'd taken the right turns. I followed the same route out. I even passed the same downed tree branch twice. I parked outside the house and just sat in the car. I didn't want to go back inside. I thought about sleeping in the car, but it didn't feel safe. Eventually, I forced myself back into the house and locked everything again. I stayed inside next day. I kept the knife with me everywhere. I didn't eat much. I didn't shower. I just watched from the windows. At one point, I saw someone walking between the trees. A man, I think, just standing still, then disappearing behind a trunk. I never saw him come out the other side. I took every curtain down that night, so I could see out from every angle. The last night I was there, I slept on the couch in the living room. The upstairs just felt wrong. Around 3:30 a.m., I woke up to the sound of the front doorknob turning. Slow. Testing. I didn't move. I held my breath and waited. Then I heard the soft scrape of something sliding across the floorboards of the porch. Then nothing. In the morning, I found a dead rabbit on the porch. Its neck was broken. No blood. Just placed there like an offering. I didn't unpack anything. I threw my bag into the trunk and drove again. This time, I went in the opposite direction from the day before. No GPS, no maps, just a guess. I drove until I ran out of gravel and hit cracked pavement. I didn't stop, even when I hit a pothole, so hard my front tire bent. Eventually, I found a highway and flagged down a truck. I told the driver I'd gotten lost hiking. I didn't tell him about the house or the town. I just wanted out. Later, I tried to look up coal pines again. Nothing came up, not even on satellite maps. The listing was gone. My reservation history just said, location unavailable. The photos I'd saved from the Airbnb app were gone too. Blank gray squares. I've tried to explain it to myself 100 times. I've told myself maybe it was some messed up community that liked to screw with outsiders. Maybe they were all in on it. Maybe I imagined parts of it because I was already stressed out. But I can't explain how I ended up back in the town after driving in a straight line, or why no records of it exist anymore. I still think about that house sometimes, about the silence in the town, about the rabbit. I've moved since then. I live in a city now. Lots of people, lots of lights. I never book Airbnbs anymore, not even for a weekend. I don't trust quiet places. I don't trust small towns. And I don't trust being alone in the woods. Because I've learned that when something feels wrong, it usually is. You just have to be smart enough to leave before it's too late. It was the second night of our camping trip, and I was 13 at the time. We were staying in a bush area. Nothing fancy, just me, a couple of family members, and a friend or two. We had set up close to a creek, surrounded by thick trees and dry scrub. The adults were in their tents, but I decided to sleep outside on a tarp. It made me feel tougher, like I was doing something more real. No tent walls, just me and the stars. The air was crisp and still, the kind of night where everything sounds louder than it should. Crickets chirped somewhere in the distance, and every once in a while a gum tree would creak as it shifted with the breeze. I was curled up in my sleeping bag with my backpack stuffed under my head as a pillow. It wasn't comfortable, not really, but it felt better than nothing. I had my hoodie pulled tight, only my nose sticking out, just listening to the quiet hum of the bush and trying to fall asleep. I was just starting to drift off when I heard something. A noise to the left. It wasn't loud, just a soft rustling, but it was sharp enough to snap me fully awake. My eyes flew open. I stayed completely still, heart already picking up speed. It was the kind of noise that didn't match the wind or normal animal sounds. It sounded like something moving through the dry leaves, like something deliberate. Another rustle, then the sound of branches shifting. Something, or someone, was walking through the bush nearby. I sat up too fast, and my sleeping bag twisted around me. I fought it off and looked toward the sound, but it was too dark to see anything clearly. There was no moon, just a faint glow from the stars above, and the trees blocked most of that anyway. Everything out past the immediate area was just shifting shadows. The noise kept coming, leaves crunching, bushes rustling. It wasn't heavy, but it wasn't small either. Bigger than a possum, maybe even as big as a dog. I strained my ears, holding my breath, hoping it would just stop, but it didn't. I looked around for something, anything to defend myself with. There was nothing. No stick, no rock, no flashlight. My stomach turned, and I had this sudden panicky thought that maybe this was how people got killed in the middle of nowhere. Sleeping on the ground like idiots while something stalked them from the trees. I ducked back into my sleeping bag and pulled it over my head, breathing as quietly as I could. I felt like a coward, but there was no part of me that wanted to get up and go see what it was. Every horror story I'd ever heard, every dumb movie where someone says, "I'll check it out," and never comes back, it all flashed through my head. No way. I was not doing that. The rustling got closer. It circled a little to the side, then stopped completely. Just silence. For a few seconds I thought maybe it had gone, but then something tugged at my head. My pillow shifted. My bag. I thought maybe I'd moved it by accident, but then it tugged again. Slowly, carefully. Not like someone yanking it. More like something dragging it, inch by inch. I stayed frozen. I didn't even breathe. Then the bag was gone. I heard it slide over the tarp and hit the ground beside me. Something was dragging it into the bushes. The same rustling started up again, now heading away from me. That's when my brain fully broke. My whole body tensed up, and all I could think was that someone had come into our camp and was stealing things, or worse, setting me up for something awful. I started imagining a man with a knife hiding in the dark, or some animal ready to jump me. I was too afraid to scream, too afraid to move. I just lay there in my bag, heart slamming, breath shaking. Then I had this insane idea. I thought, what if I scare them first? I remembered some random advice I'd read online once about scaring away wild animals or people. Make noise, pretend to be something bigger, meaner. In my head, barking like a dog seemed like a good idea at the time. I figured if it was a person, they'd think I had a dog. If it was an animal, maybe it would get confused and run off. So I did it. Still wrapped in my sleeping bag like an idiot burrito, I sat up halfway and just started barking. Loud. Panicked. Not even trying to sound like a real dog, just barking. Like a lunatic. And then I stood up, still barking, hoping to look big and scary even though I probably looked like some sleep-deprived weirdo flailing around. The rustling stopped. I stood there frozen, squinting into the trees, my sleeping bag around my knees and bare feet on the tarp. And then I saw it. A small, round shape waddled out from the edge of the bushes. It was low to the ground, chunky, with thick legs and tiny eyes that caught the starlight for a second. It looked up at me. Not afraid, not impressed, just staring. It had my bag in its mouth. A wombat. A goddamn wombat. It just stood there for a second, then dropped the bag, sniffed it, and turned around like nothing had happened. No panic, no fear, just casually waddling back into the bush like it had done nothing wrong. The rustling faded with it as it disappeared into the undergrowth. I just stood there in the cold, still half tangled in my bag, watching the spot where it had vanished. My heart was still hammering. I felt dizzy and stupid. The whole time I'd been shaking with fear, thinking it was a killer or some wild animal trying to get at me. It had just been a wombat. I walked over and grabbed my bag. It was a bit wet and covered in dirt, but everything inside seemed fine. I wiped it off the best I could and crawled back into my sleeping bag. I didn't sleep well after that. Every sound after that made me twitch. Every time a twig snapped or the wind shifted the leaves, I'd freeze and wait for another visit. But nothing else came. No more rustling, no more stolen bags. Just me, lying there in the dark, feeling dumb, but still kind of wired from how scared I'd been. Looking back now, it's hilarious. A wombat. But that night, at 13 years old, it was terrifying. It felt real. The fear wasn't just in my head, it was in my whole body. It didn't matter that it turned out to be nothing. In the moment, it was everything. That fear, that panic, it stayed with me. Even now, whenever someone suggests sleeping outside without a tent, I think about that night. I remember the feeling of that bag slipping away and the silence that followed. And then I remember barking like a dog at a wombat. Yeah, never again. We were about 6 of us, old friends from college, and had planned a 3-day camping trip near Lake Erie on the Canadian side. It was early summer, warm enough to enjoy the outdoors, but still cool at night. We'd picked a remote patch of land up on a slight rise that overlooked the lake. Nothing too dramatic, not a mountain or anything, but enough of a slope that you could see out across the water and down the shore for a good distance. The spot was dry, rugged, not maintained. No outhouses, no picnic tables, just a few trees, hard-packed dirt, and the lake below. We arrived around noon on the first day, parked a couple of cars about half a kilometer back on a wide gravel shoulder, then hiked our gear in. It wasn't a marked campground, just a known patch of wilderness where people sometimes stayed. The hiking wasn't bad. You had to push through some brush, and it was steep in a few spots, but nothing crazy. We set up camp just above the slope that led down to the lake. The view was great. Clear blue water, the sound of waves lapping against the rocky shore, and no other people anywhere nearby. That first day went smoothly. We pitched 3 tents, gathered some dry wood for a fire, and spent the afternoon drinking beer, skipping stones, and bullshitting. That night, we cooked hot dogs over the fire, shared stories, and passed around a flask of whiskey until the stars came out. We went to bed late, heads full of smoke and laughter, and everyone crashed hard. The second day started lazy. I got up just after sunrise to piss and caught a quiet breeze coming off the lake. I sat on a rock with a granola bar and watched the water glint. The others stirred a little later. We made instant coffee, fried some eggs and bacon on a portable burner, and planned to head down to the lake for a swim after it warmed up. It was sometime around late afternoon when my buddy Kyle started complaining about his stomach. He was pacing a little, holding his gut, said he felt bloated and crampy. We figured it was something he ate, maybe the sausage from breakfast, or maybe the beer mixing badly. At first he just groaned and joked about it, but pretty soon he was doubled over and sweating. It got intense fast. Eventually, he just grabbed a roll of toilet paper, didn't say anything, and made his way down the path toward the lake. The rest of us were up by the fire, half watching, half laughing at the way he was waddling like he couldn't quite keep it all in. It wasn't funny to him, obviously, but the rest of us were still in that light camp mood where everything feels silly. He made it down the slope to a flatter area right at the lake's edge. It was maybe 10 or 12 feet below where we sat, a mix of smooth rocks and sand with the water lapping just a few feet beyond. We tried to give him space, but honestly, we were kind of watching just because it was hard not to. A few minutes later, we saw him shuffling into the water, pants off, trying to clean himself off. It wasn't deep. He was standing in maybe 3 feet of water, about waist high. He bent down, splashing water over himself, and that's when it happened. 1 second, He was there, standing in the shallows, his back to us, and then he wasn't. It was like watching someone drop straight through a trapdoor. There was no splash, no flailing, just a sudden drop. 1 second he was upright, the next he was gone under the surface. At first we all just froze. It didn't make sense. The water was shallow. Maybe he slipped, maybe he ducked down for a laugh, but it was weird. Too fast, too smooth. No sound except the usual lapping of water. We waited, thinking he'd pop back up, grinning, trying to scare us. But nothing. 10 seconds passed, then 20, then a full minute. That's when a mood broke and we all stood up. A few of us started running down the slope toward the lake. My heart was pounding by the time I got close. Just as I reached the edge, there was this sudden thrashing in the water. It was violent. Kyle shot up out of the lake like a man being launched, screaming at the top of his lungs, stumbling, coughing, flailing wildly. He bolted toward the shore like something was still chasing him. His arms were covered in scratches, and his face was twisted with raw panic. He didn't stop until he was well out of the water, up on the rocks, bent over, gasping for air. We circled him, trying to figure out what had just happened, but he was shaking, wide-eyed, and couldn't talk right away. Eventually, through short bursts, he told us what he remembered. He said he felt something wrap around his ankle, hard like fingers or claws. He didn't know. It yanked him under so fast he couldn't get a breath. He said it dragged him not down but out, further into the lake. He fought it, kicked and clawed. He said it felt like it was pulling him toward the deeper part, the drop-off just a few meters out. He didn't remember surfacing. He just kept struggling until suddenly he broke free or it let go. We looked at where he'd gone under and where he popped up. It didn't match. He'd surfaced at least 10 meters from where we'd last seen him. In shallow water like that, it didn't make sense. He couldn't have swum that far under the surface in that time. And even if he had, the dragging part still didn't add up. We walked the shore for an hour, poking around, trying to see if maybe there was something, a hole, a current, maybe a sudden shelf drop-off we hadn't seen before. But the lake floor, there was smooth rock and packed sand. Nothing deep, nothing dangerous. No logs, no sharp drops, no underwater weeds thick enough to tangle. Just 3 feet of clear water and a gradual slope. After a while, we gave up. Kyle stayed wrapped in a sleeping bag the rest of the day, refusing to go anywhere near the water. That night, none of us spoke much. We didn't make a fire. We stayed in our tents, zipped up tight, just listening to the wind moving through the trees and the distant sound of the waves hitting the shore. The third day, we packed up early. No one said it directly, but the fun was over. It wasn't that anyone thought Kyle was lying. His panic was real. He wasn't the type to make up shit for attention. And he hadn't had anything to drink that day. None of us had. It was supposed to be a dry trip, no drugs, just clean camping. We'd agreed to it before going. Even now, years later, when we talk about that trip, that moment always gets quiet. Kyle still swears something grabbed him. Not a fish, not a cramp. He says he felt fingers like a hand, tight and pulling. He never went back to that lake. None of US did. It could have been a freak thing, a whirlpool, an underwater current, some natural force we didn't understand. Maybe he panicked and it just felt like something was grabbing him. Maybe the shock of the cold, his body reacting to the cramps, sent him into a spiral. We tried to explain it a dozen different ways, but none of them really fit. All I know is that I saw my friend disappear in 3 feet of calm water like he'd been yanked by something invisible, and he came out of that lake looking more scared than I've ever seen anyone in my life. Something happened out there. I don't know what, but it was real.